Majestic Owl Publishing, LLC presents Memories on Main Street, Book 1 from Hearts of Maplewood Grove series by Wendy Meadows. Chapter 1. CLEO. "You'll have to postpone Michael too," Cleo said, clamping her phone between her shoulder and cheek while she zipped up the last of her bags. "I don't know how long I'll be gone, so if it can wait, let it." "Are you sure you're okay with this?" Lydia asked. Cleo sighed and straightened, taking the phone in hand. Of course, she would rather have stayed and handled business herself. "There's nothing I can do about it now. My family needs me." "I understand," Lydia said sympathetically. "It's going to be okay." "I hope so. If anything comes up, you know you can contact me. I'll check my emails every day and call if there's anything that isn't as it should be." "I meant with your dad," Lydia whispered. "Right." Cleo didn't know if it was something she could bank on. Her dad's condition had been getting worse, and these things just didn't get better with time. "We'll see how it goes. You'll keep in touch as much as you can?" "I will," Lydia promised, not for the first time, and Cleo finally ended the call. She dropped the phone on the bed and mentally ticked off her list of things to remember one more time. She'd made sure she had cleared the perishables out of the fridge, turned off water and gas, and set the thermostat to energy saving. Nothing else needed to be done. It was time to leave. Cleo couldn't find any more reasons to postpone the trip. She knew she had to go. Her dad needed her. It had been too long since she'd seen him, and from what her mom had told her, he was getting worse. Dementia was an ugly beast, dragging away loved ones in bits and pieces, stealing parts of what made them who they were. Cleo had to go before it was too late. That didn't mean it was a simple trip to make. She'd left Maplewood Grove, her childhood town, behind her a long time ago, and going back now. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She shook them off. Lydia could handle all the admin for Windy City Glow, the company Cleo had started from scratch all those years ago. If anything went wrong, she could always hop on the next flight and be back in a couple of hours. "It's going to be okay," she told herself. "It's going to be just fine." She picked up her luggage and carried it to the cab that waited for her. The drive to Midway was a short one, and as soon as she was on the plane, Cleo opened her laptop again to focus on a few last-minute business emails. A 2-hour flight to Nashville wasn't long, but keeping busy stopped her mind from wandering, from obsessing over what it would be like to see her mother again. Elaine Tanner wasn't an easy woman to deal with. She was the reason Cleo had left Maplewood Grove in the first place. And going back to see her dad meant Cleo had to face her mom again, too. The emails on the flight didn't take up nearly enough time. Cleo was done before she was halfway to her destination. She ordered a bottle of water and sipped it while she looked out over the clouds that created thick puffs around them. The weather was beautiful this time of year, and although the summer heat would be tapering down, Maplewood Grove would still be hotter than the weather she'd grown accustomed to in Chicago over the past 2 decades. When they landed, Cleo pulled out her phone and dialed the number her mom had sent her the day before. "Cleo," Elaine answered. "Mom," Cleo said, already feeling a knot form in her throat. "Are you here yet?" Elaine sounded nervous. "Just got off the plane. I have to pick up my luggage and hire a car. It should be 3 hours just about, then I'm there." "Your room is ready. Do you have everything you need? Did you eat on the plane? It's almost time for lunch, but you'll miss that." "I'm not hungry," Cleo said. "I'll keep something for you," Elaine answered. Cleo shook her head. "I'm fine. I'll see you soon." Elaine was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick. "Good. See you soon." Cleo hung up the phone and slipped it into her purse, pulling the strap over her shoulder before making her way to the luggage carousel. There weren't many people waiting, and Cleo soon grabbed her suitcase and rolled it out to the parking lot. She found the right car rental stall and collected the Audi A6 that had been reserved for her. Maplewood Grove was only a 3-hour drive, and the landscape gradually transformed from city life to country roads, green grass, and blue skies. She settled back and let her mind wander. It had been years since she'd been back home. Sure, She'd come back for the occasional Thanksgiving or Christmas when her job allowed, which it usually didn't since she owned Windy City Glow and there was always something to do. Cleo could have taken the time off, but it was easier to focus on work than have to deal with her mother and the past. She'd left Maplewood Grove the first time when she was 18. She'd felt stifled, her dreams crushed, and she'd realized the only way she'd be able to spread her wings and fly was if she did it somewhere other than home. Chicago had become her business hub, the place where she felt she could be herself the most, and her career had taken off. It had taken precedence above all else: relationships, most friendships, family. The drive would offer a change in scenery and allow her to mentally prepare for what lay ahead. As Cleo drove, she thought of the times she'd done this drive before. It had always been the same. The closer she got to Maplewood Grove, the heavier her heart felt. Cleo hadn't planned to come back. She hadn't planned to stay either, but with her dad's health declining, she wanted to be there. How many times had he asked her to come and she'd said she was too busy? The town finally appeared on the horizon, and after a while, she drove past the sign that welcomed her to Maplewood Grove. The town was just as it had been years ago when she'd left it all behind. The courthouse-turned-museum just off the square was the same, with the fountain in front and the surrounding park, the library on the opposite side of the street, and the town's main street stretching down the road. A row of shops on each side, and the square with its benches, potted plants, and trees. The town looked almost the same. There was a new coffee shop next to the bookstore, and a florist had replaced a store that Cleo couldn't remember the name of. But apart from that, the town still had that honeyed look about it, like it had been taken from the pages of a coloring book or directly from a postcard. "Wish you were here." Cleo weaved her way through the maze of streets in the small town, knowing them by heart. Finally, she parked in front of her childhood home. The white clapboard house had been repainted and the windows replaced, but the structure remained the same. It was a 2-story house with a wraparound porch. Her mom's car, a new Honda, was parked in the driveway. The house was surrounded by a small garden, a wooden fence encircling the property. Here we go. Cleo took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Her mother's eyes were rimmed red, her skin pale, her dark hair streaked with gray. She opened the door before Cleo could reach it, and they stood a moment, taking each other in. "It's good to see you, Mom," Cleo said, her voice hoarse. "I've missed you, Cleo," her mom said. It was the closest they would ever get to a reunion scene, and Cleo knew it. She didn't want to break the truce, so she just nodded. "Come on, I'll show you your room," her mom said, stepping back. "Is Dad awake?" Cleo asked. "He's in the garden." Cleo followed her into the house, the air conditioning hitting her like a brick wall, and the smell of homemade food filling her nostrils. The house was the same as well, as if no one had touched a thing in the years since Cleo had last set foot here. The wooden floors were covered with carpets. The same couches stood against the walls, and pictures of Cleo's parents and Cleo when she was a child were framed and hanging on the walls. The house had always been tidy, her mother's pride and joy. Elaine led Cleo upstairs and showed her to a room. The walls were papered, and the bedspread was a quilt made by her grandmother. "I've laid out fresh towels for you," Elaine said. "Thanks, Mom." They stood together for a moment. "You've lost weight," Elaine finally said. Cleo shrugged. "Work is busy." "Have you been eating well?" "I just get busy," Cleo said. Her mother sighed. "You have to eat, Cleo." "You can't neglect yourself." Cleo wasn't willing to be pulled into a discussion. The questions weren't because her mom cared. It was because she was incredibly critical of everything Cleo did. Cleo would leave it for now. She didn't have the energy to fight. "I have to see Dad," she said. Her mom nodded. Cleo walked down the stairs, following the hallway, and finally stepped out onto the patio. Her father, Thomas, was in his rocking chair, the one he'd sat in ever since she could remember, looking over the garden. "Hi, Dad," she breathed. "Cleo." Her dad's face lit up. He struggled to get out of the rocking chair, and she hurried over to help him. He threw his arms around her and squeezed her. Cleo's heart twisted and she swallowed hard. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice rough. "It's about time to start school again." Cleo frowned and glanced at her mom, who'd stepped out behind her. "I'm off for a few more days," she said carefully. "Of course," her dad said, nodding, and he seemed confused. "Why don't we have something to eat?" her mom suggested. Cleo nodded. Her mom disappeared inside the house, and her dad motioned for Cleo to sit down next to him. "Are you excited to see your friends again?" he asked. "It's been a long summer." "You know, the shop has been doing so well. I think I'll close for the few days before the festival, spend some quality time with you. But tell me, have you given what you want to study any more thought?" Cleo blinked at her dad. His dementia was worse than her mom had let on. A lot worse. "I think I'll go into cosmetics," Cleo said. After all, that's what she'd done. "Oh, your mother might not like that," Thomas said, lowering his voice. Cleo nodded sadly. Her mother hadn't liked it at all. It was the reason it had all fallen apart, but that had been decades ago. Why hadn't Elaine mentioned how bad things had gotten? Cleo had thought she was coming home to spend time with her dad, to make up for lost time, but in his mind, clearly, time hadn't even passed since she'd left. "How are you, Dad?" Cleo asked. "I think I want to take up hunting," Thomas said firmly. "I don't care what your mother says." She'd said no all those years ago. "You should do it," Cleo said with a smile. "It's always good to follow your dreams. You just have to do it, and it will work out." Thomas smiled at her and nodded. "You're right, you know." "I'll talk to your mom." Cleo's mother stepped out onto the patio carrying a tray of drinks and plates with snacks. "I don't think she'll like it, Cleo," Thomas said. "But maybe you'll help me convince her." Cleo glanced at her mom. The last person on earth who would convince Elaine was Cleo, but she wasn't going to say that. Instead, she forced a smile and tried to push away the fact that she clearly had underestimated what was going on here. What a welcome home. Chapter 2. York. "You're up early," York said when he walked into the ranch house kitchen where Braden already nursed a cup of coffee, scrolling on his phone. It was still dark out, sunrise a while away, but they started that early on the ranch and had to get ready for another day of work. Braden was York's only son. There had been a time when York had thought he'd have more children, but life had a way of changing direction, pivoting on a dime. He'd done everything he could to raise Braden right, to give him the life he deserved despite only having one parent, a father who didn't know what he was doing. "I thought I'd get an early start. I want to mend those fences before we do anything else, so we don't have half our cattle ending up next door again." York grinned. Yeah, Maggie wasn't happy about that. Not with the cows trampling her tulips. "I would say she should keep the gate to her garden shut, but the cattle weren't supposed to be there in the first place, so I kept my mouth shut." York laughed. "Probably wise. Maggie might look all sweet and innocent, but she's got a sharp tongue." "Maybe she should make sculptures of them next time," Braden offered. York snorted. "That's also something best left unsaid." "Told you I bit my tongue." York chuckled. His next-door neighbor was a quirky artist, and her entire yard was filled with sculptures made from recycled objects, but she wasn't shy and withdrawn from the world. She made her mark, whether it was through her art or through her outspoken nature. "She's a good woman," Braden replied, sticking up for her because she was a good woman, eccentric but good. York nodded. "Yeah, let's get cracking. I want to get the menial work out of the way before breakfast." Braden looked down at his cup and nodded. "I'm taking this with me, though." York shook his head but couldn't help grinning. Braden was well-rounded, a decent human being. Despite York's failings as a father, he was sure he'd messed it up in more ways than one. Braden was the kind of man he could be proud of. Now all his son needed was a good woman. Unfortunately, York wasn't a good example in that department either. It had always just been him and Braden, And as much as he was involved in the town, finding love again always seemed to elude him. "I'm headed into town later," York said before Braden headed out of the door. "I'm going to get a few things from the store." "Do you need anything?" Braden shrugged. "Not that I can think of." "All right, well, if you come up with something, you can let me know." "You take your phone with you this time?" York laughed. "There's merit in moving forward, but there's good in the old ways, too." Braden chuckled. "Okay, Grandpa. I'm going to mend the fence. See you later." York took a bite of his toast, washing it down with a swig of his own coffee. He glanced at his watch. He didn't want to be late. The community was meeting for the Harvest Festival, and he wanted to be there to throw a few ideas into the pot and offer his services. He rinsed his cup and saucer, leaving them on the side for later. Then he made his way out the front door. He was halfway across the yard when a loud crash had him turning on his heel. His gaze was drawn to the barn, the doors hanging open. One of the wheels must have fallen off. York shook his head. That was one more job he would need to add to his list. The barn was the oldest structure on the property. It had been built by his great-grandfather, and every generation since had taken care of it. It would be a shame to lose it, but he didn't know how long he could patch it up, or how many more times it could be repaired before it became a danger. Maybe he could stop at the Tanner shop, find out if Elaine could help him with an idea. Since Thomas had gotten sick, the old man hadn't been in the store anymore to offer his advice, but Elaine Tanner was as skilled as her husband. They'd monopolized the hardware scene in town for decades now, and if anyone could help, it was them. It wasn't a far drive from the ranch to the center of town, but the heat of the sun was already beginning to beat down on his shoulders, making the cotton shirt he wore stick to his back. Maybe he should have left his jacket in the car, but he wanted to look neat for the meeting, being a formidable member of the community and all. York smiled and nodded as he passed the townsfolk, most of them people he'd known his entire life. There wasn't much turnover here, not like some places he knew. The turnout at the town hall was about what he'd expected. He nodded at the Smiths, at Walker Allen, who lived 2 ranches over, and the Miller triplets, who were all about twice as tall as their parents, and took up a quarter of the room with their width. The meeting went about the same as it always did. There was talk about the festival and then a request for donations for a few of the older folk who were down on their luck. York always donated money, and he was happy to see several other people do the same. By the time he stepped out of the stuffy confines of the town hall, he felt as if he could breathe again. The air was fresh, carrying the heat of the summer, but the air tasted of the winter that would eventually come. The weather had already started to turn, still hot during the days, but in the evenings and the mornings, the chill in the air was starting to set in. He glanced down at his watch and then turned his attention toward the hardware store. He might as well get his business sorted, then head home and start a list of everything he needed to do before winter settled in. He had the door handle in his hand, the door half open, when the sound of a horn made him jump. He looked up, a frown already marring his brow, and saw a car swerving, nearly hitting another car that had pulled into the parking space right in front of him. "Do you mind?" a familiar voice called out at the truck going by, and York's stomach tightened. "Cleo?" The woman, whose face was set in a scowl, turned her attention to York. Her expression softened, those dark eyes locking on his. "York Walters," she said. "Fancy running into you." What was she doing here? He hadn't seen her in years. Not since she'd left for Chicago with all those big city dreams. "I didn't think I'd ever see you back here again," he said, stepping away from the door and taking a step closer to her. "Yeah, well," she said, "needs must. I've got a few days to sort some things out. Dad's been—" She swallowed. "I know," he answered softly. "We miss him in the shop." Cleo glanced at the door, and that gave York some time to study her. She looked different than she had all those years ago. Gone was the girl who'd worn faded jeans and loose T-shirts. She was all business now, wearing a dress suit and pumps, and her hair was pulled away from her face in a slick knot at the base of her neck. It was her face that held his attention. He remembered her from before, remembered the soft curve of her jaw, her dark eyes and full lips. But there was more to her now. Her face was thinner, her features harder. She looked tired. "How's your dad doing?" York asked. "Worse than I thought," she admitted. "I didn't realize—" Mom made it sound like his dementia wasn't that bad. "Dementia is a difficult illness," York pointed out. "Yeah, there are times everything is normal, and then a moment later he has no idea who I am, and I have to introduce myself like I'm a visitor. This morning he asked me if I was a realtor." York laughed. "It's the country." "Everyone's concerned about being forced to sell." Cleo shook her head. "Well, I'm here now." "Hopefully it means something." "It will," York said softly. "How are things now that you're back?" "They're—" She let out a breath. "Okay, I guess. Mom and I still don't get along. Big surprise, but we swallow it for Dad's sake, I guess." York knew all too well what it was like to put on a face when things were tough, but that was how you got through. Fake it till you make it. "If there's something you need, you just let me know," he offered. "Braden and I can do whatever it is you need." Cleo blinked at him. "Braden, your son." York nodded. They'd known each other at a time when they didn't have families, when he wasn't married and she hadn't found some big love in Chicago. It seemed strange, talking about life as grown-ups now. But times changed, didn't they? It didn't do to not change along with it. "He's 20 this year. Can you believe it?" Cleo shook her head, a smile playing around her lips. "I really can't." "How's Helen doing?" Cleo asked. York stiffened. "She's living the life she always wanted, I'm sure." Cleo nodded, glancing into the distance where a rumble of thunder started. "I hope it rains." "Yeah, it'll help this heat." "It's supposed to be headed into fall," Cleo agreed. "Doesn't always feel like it, but you'll still be complaining about this weather, and next thing you know, winter snuck up on you and you find yourself wishing for summer again." Cleo smiled. "I forget what the weather is like out here." Always a surprise. She tugged at her blazer, form-fitting and elegant. "I should go." York tipped an imaginary hat at her. "The offer stands." "We're at your service. If you need something, you just shout." "Thanks," she said. "I'll see you around, York." "It was nice seeing you." "You too," York said. And when she walked away, he watched her go. He brushed his fingers over his beard, taking in her form as she walked away, with a confidence in her step he hadn't noticed when they were kids. When they'd been young, she'd barely given him a second glance. He'd had a crush on her, had done since he was young, but she'd never noticed. Looking at her now, he doubted he was the kind of man she'd notice, but she was as mesmerizing as always. York stepped into Tanner's and Elaine stood behind the cash register. "What can I get you, York?" she asked with a smile. Her dark eyes were just like Cleo's, and her dark gray hair was tucked in the same bun. If only they knew how alike they were. York explained the problems he had at the ranch: the gate, the fences, and the barn. Elaine suggested a few things that could work, some tools and other items he would need. "And how is your son?" Elaine asked as she rang up the purchase. "Good," York said, offering a lopsided grin. "Still working hard and learning the trade." "Good for him." "Yep, always good to have a hand around the place. I see Cleo's back in town, too." Elaine nodded slowly. "I should have called her sooner, but it's hard, you know?" She's always so stubborn, even now. Heading on 40, but still blind when it comes to herself and what she needs. It's tough being a mother, knowing what's best for someone when they can't see the problem. York nodded. "I get it, Elaine." He was a father, too, after all. He'd had some tough years with Braden, but then Braden had never wanted to leave him. He'd always believed the ranch should stay in the family and he would stay put, take care of York in his old age, and keep going with the Walters legacy. In the Tanner family, it had never been that simple. But at least she's here now. Elaine pressed her lips together, nodding. She glanced toward the door. "I shouldn't be talking like this," she said, scolding herself more than informing York. "It's nothing to trouble you with." She rang up the items for York, and he thanked her before leaving the shop. The sun was high in the sky now, and the air felt thick, a blanket that wrapped around him, making his skin damp with perspiration. In the distance, storm clouds formed, promising to break the humidity a little. He loaded his purchases into the truck and slid behind the wheel, turning the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he drove home, thoughts of Cleo lingering in the back of his mind. Chapter 3. CLEO. "I'm home," Cleo called out, walking into the house with the packets of clothing and food. "Just in time for supper," Elaine said, coming from the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron. "I made chicken." Cleo frowned. "I told you I would bring us something for tonight, Mom." Elaine scoffed. "It's not necessary to spend money on takeaways when there's perfectly good food at home. Besides, healthy organic meals are good for your father's health." Cleo bristled. "But you said the doctor gave him a clean bill of health." "Isn't my food enough?" "It's not your food, is it?" Elaine asked and waved her hand dismissively. "Just set it down. We'll find something to do with it." Cleo shook her head and put the food on the kitchen table. "I was trying to be nice." "Set the table, will you?" Elaine ordered. Cleo took cutlery from the kitchen and walked to the dining room. Thomas sat in an armchair watching television. When she walked in, he looked at her, and she smiled. He frowned and looked back at the television. She sighed and set the placemats and cutlery at the dining table, putting them where she had grown up sitting. The table was large, able to seat 10 people, but it had mostly just been the 3 of them. "You can sit there, Dad." She pointed to a spot at the table. "Who are you?" he asked. "What?" "Dad. It's me." "Elaine?" Thomas called out, sounding more and more alarmed. "Elaine!" Elaine hurried into the dining room from the kitchen. "Who is this?" Cleo started, but Elaine cut her off. "It's our guest for tonight. This is Cleo. She'll be joining us for dinner." Thomas still eyed Cleo dubiously. "Kids these days don't introduce themselves the way they used to before making themselves at home." "You'll like her, sweetheart," Elaine said, patting her arm. "Come, I made your favorite. Sit down. I'll dish up for you." She gestured for Cleo to follow her when Thomas took his usual seat at the dining room table. "He doesn't know who I am," Cleo said, standing in the kitchen doorway. "It will be fine. Just be polite. Make small talk." "How long has this been happening?" Cleo demanded. "For months, Cleo." "It comes and goes. It will be fine." Cleo shook her head. "I don't think it will be." "He's sick. He doesn't know who I am." "He knew yesterday," Elaine said, and started dishing up rice, potatoes, chicken, and vegetables on Thomas's plate before making another plate for herself. "He might know again tomorrow." "Mom." "Let's just eat, Cleo," Elaine said, and left the kitchen with the 2 plates. Cleo took a plate and dished for herself, trying to fight her feelings. She didn't want to lose her temper, or fall apart. She wasn't sure which was closer to the surface. When Cleo joined her parents in the dining room, she sat down, aware of Thomas's scrutiny. "It's a lovely home you have here," she said politely, making small talk. It was ridiculous to have to talk like this, to pretend she was the stranger her father thought she was. "Thank you," Elaine said. "What do you do?" Thomas asked Cleo. She glanced at her mom before taking a deep breath. "I own a cosmetics company in Chicago." "You own a company?" Thomas asked, clearly impressed. "Well, that's something." "What are you doing in town?" Cleo hesitated. She had no idea how to answer that. "She's visiting family in town," Elaine offered in Cleo's stead, and Cleo was relieved. "Who's that?" Thomas asked. "Her friend, Donna." That wasn't a lie. Donna Rivers had been Cleo's best friend since kindergarten, and she was one of the few people in Maplewood Grove she still had contact with. Thomas looked at Cleo. "The Rivers girl has too many children," Thomas said, waving his hand. "I think she's doing all right," Cleo said. "She's a good mother." "There are different ways to define a good mother," Elaine said tightly. Cleo stifled a groan. Not everything was a personal attack. The rest of dinner went just about the same, awkward and strained, with Cleo having to pretend she was a stranger, asking questions as if she didn't know all the ins and outs of the family, as if she wasn't here to see her dad, to spend time with him, to reminisce about times gone by. What if all those memories were gone? When supper was over, Cleo helped Elaine in the kitchen with washing up. "That was weird," Cleo said. "You get used to it," Elaine said. "You should have told me how bad it was." She dried the plates as Elaine washed them and put them on the drip tray. "I did tell you." Cleo shook her head. "You made it sound like he just has a lapse now and then." "What do you call this then?" Elaine asked. Cleo bit her tongue, letting the silence between them stretch thin before she spoke again. "I would have come," she said softly. Elaine didn't answer. "You should have told me sooner," Cleo added. "I might have had some time with him." Elaine put the last plate on the drip tray and turned to look at Cleo. "You never came before. Don't make it sound like it's because of me you're only here now." Cleo sighed. They would have fought over this no matter when it happened. She knew that, but she had to make a point. "You have no idea what I'm feeling right now, Mom," she said. "Oh, please," Elaine said and rolled her eyes. "You left, you have your life, and you have no idea what your father and I have been through. It's not like you told me. You've made it perfectly clear what you think of our lives. You don't respect anything we do or stand for." "That's not true," Cleo protested. "Isn't it? I know what you think of us, of Maplewood Grove, of your roots. I left. I admit it. I made a life for myself, and I'm not going to apologize for that. I could have been here for him. I could have been here to spend time with him, created memories, still had him when he was here, mentally. Now, he's just a shell. He's not the man he used to be." "I never stopped you from being here with him," Elaine said tightly and grabbed a second towel to dry off the cutlery. "You made me feel like it was wrong to leave. Like I was being disloyal by dreaming big. Like it was selfish." "You know it's not about that," Elaine argued. "Then what was it about?" Cleo demanded. "I'm not doing this with you now," Elaine said, shaking her head. She put away the pots and pans that had already been dried, shutting the cabinet doors harder than was necessary. "You stole the time I could have had with him," Cleo blurted out, finally saying what was really on her mind. "By diminishing what's happening, you stopped me from spending time with Dad while he was still here. You were the one who left. Don't blame me if you lost out on precious times. You made a choice. You can't have your cake and eat it, too." Cleo stared at Elaine, tears stinging her eyes. She felt like she was coming undone at the seams, her composure unraveling. Elaine glared at her daughter, daring her to keep fighting, but Cleo snapped her mouth shut. She wasn't going to fall for that. They were going to go around in circles. "I'm going out," Cleo said. "It's going to rain." "I'll be fine." She walked through the house and out of the front door, slamming it shut behind her. The wind had picked up and the air smelled like rain. Electricity danced in the air and lightning crackled in the distance. She headed toward her car and then realized she'd left the keys inside. No way she was going back in there now. She was 38, but being back home made her feel like the teenager she used to be before she left. Not good enough, not driven enough, not anything that made her mother proud. Cleo walked, hands in her pockets, her shoulders hunched. It had been a mistake to come home. She should have stayed in Chicago, away from Maplewood Grove, away from her parents and their judgment. She shouldn't have even considered coming. She'd thought she would be able to come, deal with her dad's condition, spend a couple of weeks here, and then go back to Chicago with a clear conscience, knowing she'd done the right thing. But this wasn't going to work. Her mother was making things even harder, and she had no idea how to deal with it. She couldn't keep her mouth shut. A tear streaked down Cleo's cheek, and she brushed it away, irritated. She didn't want to be emotional. That wasn't why she'd come here. Rain started to fall. At first, drop by drop, and then suddenly all at once so that she was drenched in seconds. Great. At least the rain would hide her tears. Chapter 4. York. On Saturdays, the rancher's market opened at sunrise, and York stocked the stall with his fresh produce. His main income was cattle, which he auctioned off as the season came to a close, but he had some fresh produce to sell, a couple of eggs, and Braden's woodwork. There was merit in not putting all his eggs in one basket. He grinned when he glanced at the egg basket. This was his favorite day of the week. The weather was beautiful, the morning still chilly and crisp after the cooler night. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, it would get hotter and hotter. The rain a few nights ago had done little to break the heat, but despite how unusually hot it had been the last couple of days, the market was bustling with customers, and he was doing his favorite thing. On Saturdays, York and Braden found the time to catch up with the other townsfolk, see what they'd been up to all week, exchange gossip like a currency of its own, and eat their fill of baked goods and home-cooked meals from the food stalls. York was always the first one at the market, and Braden followed an hour later. Sometimes, if the sun wasn't too unforgiving yet, he took a break and walked through the rows of stalls to stretch his legs and say hello to his friends and neighbors. "Morning, York," Donna said, stopping in front of his stall. She squeezed the vegetables and felt the eggs. "I'll take all of these." She gestured to the eggs. "You don't have cheese?" "Not today," York said. "The main attraction are the cows. You can stick around if you need one." Donna grinned. "Imagine that." "Shall I put her to work in the kitchen?" "She'll give milk for the kids," Donna laughed. "My kids are grown enough to fetch their own milk from the store." She looked over her shoulder. "I lost Cleo again." "Is she at the market?" "Apparently she's up at 5 every morning." "Who knew the city folk have the same routines we do?" York chuckled. "It's a different life out there." "How long is she in town for, do you know?" Donna and Cleo had been friends for as long as York could remember. It was good she had someone she could lean on while she went through this tough time. "I have no idea," Donna said. "She said she's not sure, but she's only been here a few days and it's getting to her. She doesn't get along with Elaine, and I get the feeling she didn't know how serious things are with Thomas." "That's a shame," York said sympathetically. "She doesn't want to be here, but on the other hand, she feels like she can't leave." "I'm worried about her. She's not eating or sleeping much. It's hard enough as it is." "She'll be okay." "We all deal with heartache, right?" York said, although he was equally worried. He hadn't seen her in so many years, but he remembered a carefree, spirited young woman, and the woman he'd run into the other day hadn't looked like either of those things. She'd looked weighed down by life. "Right." York handed her the paper bag with her purchases. "See you, York," Donna said and glanced at Braden, who was in the middle of negotiating a price for a rocking chair he'd made. "Don't tell me," York said. "No money and she's willing to pay in kisses." Braden laughed, a blush creeping onto his cheek, and Mary, the girl he'd been trying to convince, looked just as embarrassed. Donna winked at York and left. York's mind drifted to Cleo. His heart went out to her. He wanted to reach out to her and offer his help in some way, but it had been so long since they'd last spoken, he didn't want to impose. When the auction was ready to start, York left Braden to man the stall and made his way to the auction ground, which was set up in a nearby field just off of the square so that the cattle didn't mess on the cobbles. The cattle had all been rounded up, inspected, and brought out in their pens. They'd been separated into lots, and now they were ready to be auctioned. As he sat waiting for the bidding to start, he watched the crowd around him. Everyone seemed to be chatting with each other and laughing. Couples walked past holding hands, or so close to each other they might as well have been. Most of the time, York was just fine on his own. He and Braden ran the ranch, and there was more than enough to do to keep his mind from wandering. When he was alone like this, watching others walk around with partners, sharing their lives with each other, York allowed himself a moment to miss what could have been. He'd thought after Helen, he would be able to handle being alone. He'd always been comfortable with his own company, and in the grand scheme of things, The world hadn't stopped turning. The ranch had needed attention, and Braden had needed raising. Wallowing in self-pity never got the job done. He was used to having to deal with life alone by now, but he wasn't used to the emptiness he felt from time to time. Would the hollow feeling ever go away? The auctioneer started his speech and introduced the cattle before the first lot was sold. The next lot was one of York's prized cows, and he joined in the bidding just to push up the price a little. He had a good eye, and his animals were popular, which meant he got good prices for them. This was a big reason he kept a few aside to sell here, rather than sending them all away for slaughter when the time came. Someone outbid him, and York laughed, letting the bidder take his cow. The price he fetched was a good one. It would be a good day. He swept his gaze over the crowd and spotted Cleo, who wandered through the groups of people. She looked a little out of place. She'd shucked her suit jacket, which was a good start, but still wore loose, tailored pants, and although she wasn't wearing any kind of heel, those shoes looked like they belonged in an office, not in a field with cow dung. "Joining in on the excitement?" York asked when she was close enough to hear him. "Donna must not have found her yet, or lost her again." "Yeah," Cleo said with a small smile. "It's different out here." "Not how you remember it." "I don't know," Cleo said. She looked good today, a little brighter, and she'd even braided her shoulder-length brunette hair. It suited her, pulled back from her face like that. It made her dark eyes stand out. York could get lost in those eyes. "Cleo, how are you?" She smiled brightly, not showing any signs of the exhaustion or strain Donna had mentioned. She had a solid poker face. "I'm fine." She hesitated only a moment, looking for something to say. "I saw Braden a little while ago, and he said the cows are about to be auctioned off, so I figured I'd come here and see what all the fuss was about. These auctions only happen twice a year here in Maplewood Grove, so I try to capitalize on them." "Those are yours?" Cleo asked, gesturing to the cattle in pens nearby. "Some of them." York nodded and pointed them out. "Should bring in a nice sum to tide us over through winter." Cleo's phone pinged and she took it out, opening it. Her eyes flitted over the words before she pursed her lips. "Everything okay?" York asked. "Just business." Her face had fallen. "It's tough, not being there. The company can run on its own, but I'm not in the habit of letting it." She flashed York another bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Are you planning on staying much longer?" Cleo's brows furrowed. "I have no idea. My dad's not doing great. I'd hoped to come here for a week or two, let him get his feet back under him, and I could go home." She let out a frustrated sigh. "It's just not that simple." "If your dad needs help, don't hesitate to ask." Cleo's face fell. "You don't need to get involved in this." "I've known your dad for as long as you have," York said gently. "He's my friend, too." "Thank you." York hesitated. He wanted to get to know Cleo, find out about the person she'd become, this company in Chicago she wanted to be at rather than in Maplewood Grove. "I should go," Cleo said before York could ask. He only nodded. "Good luck with the auction." "Thanks," he said. "Good luck to you, too." She scowled. "I'm going to need it." When she walked away, York watched her until she disappeared. York had met Cleo a few times when she'd come to visit her father, and although they'd been friendly, they'd never become close. She had her group of friends, and York had his. But that was the old Cleo. The Cleo he knew had been fun, vibrant, and a little wild. The Cleo he'd just spoken to was the total opposite, weighed down by troubles, a burden on her shoulders that showed even though she tried her best to hide it. York knew how it was. Helen had been the love of his life. They'd met in high school, been inseparable until they graduated. He'd known then and there he would marry her, and they'd have a family together. He'd taken over the ranch, and they'd been happy. Until they weren't. He wished he could be there for Cleo, even if it was just as someone she could talk to when times got rough. Maybe, if he ran into her again, he would ask her out for a coffee or something. She was closed off, too independent to ask for help or voluntarily lean on someone. But that didn't mean she didn't need it. Everyone needed someone sometimes, and he knew all too well what it was like to be surrounded by a town full of people and still feel completely alone. Chapter 5. CLEO. "Good morning, sweetheart," Thomas said, walking into the office where Cleo typed up an email for Lydia to go over. "How did you sleep?" Cleo glanced up at her dad. "Fine, thanks. It's hot out here." "It's hotter than it should be this time of year." Thomas frowned at her laptop. "Are you working?" "Work never sleeps," Cleo said. "Neither do you, apparently." "You push yourself too hard, honey." Cleo studied her father. He was his usual self today, remembering who she was, present in the moment, and he could access all his memories. It was jarring that some days he was himself, and others it was like he lost himself completely. It was harder for Cleo to adjust to when it changed so erratically. If he'd been ill and didn't know who she was at all, she could try to deal with that. Or she could reminisce about the good old days with him when he was himself. Not knowing what to expect was what got to her the most. "There's only one way to be successful, remember?" Cleo said. "You taught me that. You put in the work, consistency." "Overflash is key." Thomas finished the sentence for her. Yes, I know how it goes. And you're right, there is merit in working hard, always. But there's a time you should sit back and let the fruit of your labor give back." He sat down in an armchair closer to the bookshelf. "The first 10 years of your life, you're supposed to put in more than you get out. It's how a business is built. But after that, you should be getting more out and putting less in, enjoying the payout." Cleo shrugged, finishing the email and sending it off for Lydia to read. There were a few things that needed to be shuffled around if Cleo was going to stay longer. She'd meant to head home by now, but she'd been in town for a handful of days and realized that if she wanted to spend any time with the father she'd grown up with, she would have to do it as much as she could. He wasn't going to be around for long, not in his mind anyway. There isn't much else to do but work. What about friends? You don't see them? "I do occasionally," Cleo admitted. "And a relationship?" Cleo sighed and offered her dad a frustrated smile. "We both know that's not in the cards for me." Thomas grinned. "Didn't think I was going to bring it up, did you?" "I hoped you wouldn't," Cleo admitted. "There's someone for everyone, my sweet. Just because you haven't found him yet doesn't mean he's not out there." Cleo shook her head. Her father had always been a hopeless romantic, and he'd always wanted her to settle down with a man who could stand by her side and take care of her. But Cleo had been taking care of herself for a long time. She didn't need a man to do that for her. Besides, she'd never really found love the way she'd always heard of in fairy tales and stories. She'd stopped introducing the men in her life to her parents because in the end, they all faded away anyway. Cleo was good at one thing, and that was running Windy City Glow. There would be something to leave behind once she was gone, and that was what mattered. Some people left their legacy in the form of children. Others left it in things they created. Cleo would leave it in the form of a successful company. The fact that she might have wanted true love, a relationship, someone to share her struggles and successes with, was something she'd pushed away in the end. No one could have everything they wanted, right? "You look like you're feeling better today," Cleo said, changing the topic. "Much," Thomas said. "I hate it when I feel under the weather, but I think I fought off what would have been a nasty cold." Right. Her dad's condition was so much more than a cold. Did he know what he was struggling with? When his mind was intact, like today, did her mother explain to him how things were going wrong? "I think to celebrate, I want to go fishing," Thomas said and slapped his thighs before he stood up. "Fishing?" Cleo blinked. I know. It's not something you like to do, so I won't ask you if you want to come with me, but tonight, you and me. What do you say? We'll go out for a father-daughter walk like we used to in the old days." Cleo nodded, swallowing hard. That sounds great. It's a date, Thomas said with a grin and ran his hands over his thinning gray hair. I'm going to get fishing tackle from the shed and I'll see you at sunset. Cleo nodded. When her father left the room, heading out to the shed, she walked through the house to find her mother. Elaine was in her sewing room, glasses on the tip of her nose as she darned socks. Do you know Dad is going fishing? Cleo asked. Elaine only glanced up at her before focusing on her work again. It's nice weather out. That's not the point, Cleo said. Do you really think it's a good idea? Why wouldn't it be? Elaine asked. Mom, you know every way in which this can go wrong. What if something happens? What if he hurts himself? What if he forgets where he is and he's stuck out there? Elaine lowered the sock. Today is a good day, Cleo. He's himself again. Only for as long as it lasts, Cleo clapped back. Let him be himself while he can. Let him have today if that's what he needs. Cleo shook her head, frustrated. That's not how this works, Mom. You should know that more than I do. Dad's illness doesn't work with time. Staying away until midnight, and when a new dawn arrives, we get something else from him. It can change at any moment, and if that happens and he's not home, no one will be there to help him. This is a bad idea. If you can't see him for who he is now, you don't deserve him when he's like this, Elaine snapped, and her face was pinched and angry. Cleo stared at her mother, feeling hurt and anger at the same time. She had been trying to hold it all together, trying to keep everything in check, trying to deal with everything that was going on, and all her mother had been doing was snapping at her. I'm only looking out for him. He's my dad. And he's my husband, Elaine said. So maybe it would be better if you were here as his daughter and not a CEO. I'm doing this because I'm his daughter, Cleo cried out, shocked that her mom was bringing up business. What does my life in Chicago have to do with anything? Since you've arrived, you've handled this as some kind of business meeting or project that needs to be managed. Your father isn't a problem to be solved, Cleo. I'm well aware, Cleo said tightly. Not only was Elaine using her life in Chicago, and by extension their differences, against her, but she still didn't seem to understand how serious this was. She was furious that her mother was trying to tell her how she was acting toward her dad. This isn't about me. That's hard to imagine since it's only been about you and how you're experiencing this since you arrived. We'd been doing this for a long time before you decided to get involved, Cleo. Cleo clenched her jaw. Yes, I'm aware you haven't been filling me in as much as I deserve. Elaine only snorted and picked up her sock to keep darning. I'm going, Thomas said. He appeared in the doorway wearing a vest with all his hooks and lures, and his cap against the sun. He had his water boots in hand, too. I'll be back later. You and me later, kiddo. He nudged Cleo and took a step forward to kiss Elaine on the cheek. Elaine forced a smile. Have fun, sweetheart. See you later. Thomas disappeared, and a moment later, the truck engine started outside. Cleo stared at her mom. So, you're not going to stop this? Elaine didn't even bother to respond, and that only upset Cleo more. I'm going out too, Cleo said and turned away. Supper's at 8. Elaine called after her. Don't be late unless you let me know in advance that I shouldn't cook for you. Cleo didn't bother gracing her mother with an answer. Instead, she grabbed her bag, her phone, and car keys. She dialed Donna's number. Are you busy? No, Donna said. What's up? Do you want to go for coffee? Sure, Donna said. Now? Yeah. My mom is driving me crazy and I just need to vent. I'll meet you at the Whistling Bean. I'm not doing anything right now. You're catching me in a lull. Cleo agreed and pointed her car in the direction of town, weaving her way through the streets. Everywhere she saw people she'd once known. A few of them recognized her and waved, but it wasn't the way it had been when she'd left. Too much time had passed, and she wasn't one of the Grovers anymore. She was an outsider now. It was just another reason she liked living in the city. It didn't matter who she was there. She could have stayed there her whole life or moved in the previous day, and she would always be treated the same. As a stranger, she thought. but at least there was consistency. When she pulled into the parking lot of the cafe, she parked and made her way to the door. The place was the same as it had been when she was growing up, although they had a different name now. There were a few round tables set up and a long table against the wall, the menu and the order board in front of the counter. Donna waved at her from a table, a cup of coffee already in front of her. "What can I get you?" the barista asked when Cleo turned to the counter. "A hazelnut cappuccino, please," Cleo said. "And a slice of apple pie," the barista added. "Oh, no, I don't." "Trust me," the barista said. "We're famous for our pies. Ben Reynolds bakes them for us especially." "Ben?" Cleo asked, glancing at Donna, who had approached her. Some of the names sounded familiar, but some didn't. It was like the world had moved on without her here. Maybe that was to be expected, but she felt like a stranger in a place where she used to know everyone and everything. "He owns the local bakery," Donna said. "You should drop in there sometime. His pastries are literally to die for." Cleo nodded and considered it. She was always careful with her figure, conscious of what she ate, but it was the kind of day when she wanted to eat her emotions. And if the pie really was that good... "Sure, I'll have a piece." The barista grinned and nodded, then walked away to the kitchen to get the rest of her order. After she paid for her order, she walked with Donna back to the table. "Thank you for meeting me so soon," Cleo said. "You were here faster than I was." "I was already in town and dying for a cup of something strong, so your call was God-sent." Cleo grinned at her best friend. Donna was always there for her and never made her feel like she imposed or asked too much, unlike Elaine, who made Cleo feel like she was never enough. "Tell me," Donna said when Cleo tried to make small talk. Cleo laughed. "I can't just start complaining right away." "Of course you can. That's what I'm here for," Donna said. Cleo gratefully launched into a rant about Elaine. She didn't want her there. She made it sound like Cleo was paranoid or underfoot or both. She'd kept it away from her how serious Thomas's condition was. Even Cleo's career was under fire. Donna listened patiently, and it felt good to let her frustrations out. "I know you've never gotten along with your mom," Donna said carefully when Cleo stopped venting, "but she's going through this, too." "What?" Cleo blinked at her friend. Donna nodded and pulled her strawberry blonde hair into a ponytail. "She's doing a lot of things wrong. I'm not taking her side. But Thomas is her husband. They built a life together, worked together, grew old together. To go through something like dementia where she's losing the person who has become her other half, it can't be easy." Cleo stifled a groan. Of course, she knew it had to be hard on her mom. Cleo hadn't come back to Maplewood Grove just to see her dad. She was here to help her mom look after him, too. Now that she knew more of what was going on, she knew her mother needed the help more than she'd realized at first. "She's the one pushing me away, no matter what I do," Cleo said. "I hear what you're saying, but I can't do anything if she won't accept help." "I hear you," Donna said, sipping her drink. "I know it's not easy." "I'm sorry your homecoming is so crappy." "It's not a homecoming," Cleo said dully. "I'm only here as long as I need to be. But enough about me. How are things with you?" Cleo asked, quickly changing the topic. Donna smiled. Same old, same old. The boys are busy with school. One is in college and the other one will be heading there in a year or two. Charlie and Frank are both working in Nashville now. They figured starting a business together would be funny, fooling the world as identical twins. Such a hoot. Cleo laughed. Donna's 4 boys had been a handful from the start, but she talked about them with so much pride. "Wow, I can't believe how much time has passed. And Henry? He's always been good." Steadfast, predictable. People don't always understand how we can have such a good relationship when we're not together. But we always were better friends than lovers. I appreciate that more and more now that we're getting older and my need for drama is fading away. He's a solid figure in the boy's life, and that's really all we need in life. We were so stupid as kids, weren't we? Donna and Henry had been married for a while, with 4 kids to show for it, but they just hadn't worked. She'd married her best friend, but when things didn't work out the way they thought, they decided it was better that they were apart. Cleo admired her friend for that. Proud of her for the life she'd built despite what had happened in her marriage, admired her for having such a healthy relationship with the boy's father so that it didn't affect them as badly as a divorce could. Children were always collateral damage when a divorce happened, and Donna and Henry had done it the right way. Donna and Cleo laughed together, but their moment was interrupted by Donna's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen with a frown before she answered. "How do you get yourself in a mess in less than an hour?" she asked after a voice on the other side rambled frantically. Donna listened a moment longer, and then she sighed. "Okay, I'll be right back." "Don't do anything until I get there, okay? I'm sure it's not so bad." Donna hung up the phone and looked apologetically at Cleo. "I have to run." Mason cut himself making food. You would think after finishing school he would know how to work with a knife. She rolled her eyes, but a smile played around her lips. At least John hasn't done anything too wild yet since he's been in college, so there's hope that Mason will turn out just fine too. She stood. "I'm sorry I have to go." "It's okay. I've gotten most of it off my chest." "Thank you for listening. You're a saint." Donna squeezed Cleo in a quick hug before she hurried out the door, and Cleo leaned back in her seat. She sipped her cappuccino, a little lost now that she sat at her table alone. Someone cleared a throat behind her. When she looked up, it was York. He wore faded jeans and a plaid shirt, and his beard, although graying and a little longer than usual, looked well kept. His blue eyes were the color of the fall skies. "I couldn't help but notice your company just left." "Oh, yeah," Cleo said, offering a sheepish smile. "Donna had to run." "Mind if I join you? I just got this and it's piping hot. I could use a minute for it to cool down before I try to drink it." Cleo shook her head. York made her nervous. He was good-looking and steadfast, and he knew who he was and what he wanted out of life. Cleo felt the same when it came to her career, but everything else seemed to fall apart. Especially now. Still, she was grateful for the company, and looking at his handsome face, he was very easy on the eyes. Didn't hurt. "What are you having?" York showed her his cup. "Hazelnut cappuccino." Cleo smiled. "That's exactly what I ordered, too." York took a seat and grinned at her. "It's my favorite, too." "Look at that. Already a lot in common." He winked at her, and Cleo couldn't help but blush. She wanted to fight it, but then she told herself it didn't matter. It was nice to get a bit of attention, and with York, everything was uncomplicated. He had nothing to do with the mess that was her life, and that was exactly what she needed right now. He didn't know it, but he was a knight in shining armor, or in faded jeans and a plaid shirt, but they came in all shapes and sizes. Chapter 6. York. Cleo looked incredible in a pair of capris and a button-down blouse. It bordered on casual, but she was still business chic, as if she couldn't quite relax. Her dark hair was loose and wavy around her face, and it made her seem softer. She drummed her fingers lightly on the table and glanced at her phone from time to time. "Are you waiting for a call?" York asked. "Oh." Cleo looked embarrassed. "No, I'm just waiting for my assistant to reply." She laughed, and it was a beautiful sound. "I don't even know if she will." "It's just a habit, I guess. I'm not used to doing nothing. It's good to take a break once in a while." "If you know how to take one," Cleo pointed out. "I work so hard that I don't really know what to do with myself when I'm not working." York leaned back in his chair and studied her face. Cleo was all business these days. York didn't doubt she was successful, but he kept looking for a glimpse of the girl he'd once known. "Tell me what you work so hard at doing," York said. "What business is it?" Cleo explained her business to York, how she'd started it from scratch and grown it into the large company it was today. "That's impressive," York said. "This is something you always wanted to do?" Cleo nodded. "Since I can remember. I've always been a fan of fashion and beauty. Not everyone understood it, but I just kept at it." "And you had to move to the city to do it," York added. Cleo glanced at him. There isn't a lot of room for growth in the beauty industry in a small town. She chose her words carefully. It made sense to move to a large city. But not Nashville, York said again. No, Cleo said, and she sighed. I guess I just needed to get away from it all, start over. It's not like I'm trying to forget who I am, even though everyone seems to think so. York frowned. Everyone? Cleo glanced at him over the rim of her cup as she drank, and he knew that there was more to the story than she let on. Of course, they didn't know each other very well, but he wanted to change that. Since he'd seen Cleo again, something about her had drawn him to her. She had a way about her that made him want to learn more, spend time with her, get to know her again. Not the girl he'd known once before, but the woman she was now. There was no doubt about Cleo's image and what she wanted the rest of the world to see. She was beautiful. She dressed well, albeit a little out of place for a ranching town in this humid heat, and she was serious about making a name for herself on her own merit. Those were all great, but York couldn't help but feel that there was a whole different side to Cleo that she carefully kept hidden. My parents, Cleo finally said, glancing at him again like she wasn't sure if she was sharing too much. Ah, York said, I know how tough it can be. Do you? York nodded. My dad is long gone. He passed away just after Helen and I got married, but I know what it was like to have to please him. Even now, years down the line, there are times I still wonder if he would have approved. There's a conscious effort to not put that same pressure on myself, as if he's the one doing it. Cleo looked surprised for a moment, as if York's confession broke the ice, allowing her to be vulnerable, and she opened up too. You'd think after years and years they'd get used to the idea. They're not. She pursed her lips together, turning her cup around and around on the table. Well, my mom. My dad is fine with what I do, when he remembers. She shook her head. I didn't mean for that to come out badly. She looked like she was going to cry. Hey, it's okay, York said. What your dad is dealing with isn't an easy thing to go through. Not for him and not for everyone around him. You're the first person who seems to think that I have a right to be a mess about this. Everyone else thinks that I gave up that right to be emotionally involved when I left. York reached across the table and touched his hand to Cleo's. When their skin made contact, it was electric, and Cleo looked up at York. Everyone, he asked softly. My mom, Cleo answered hoarsely, but it feels like everyone else is judging me just as hard as she is. We're not, York said, deliberately saying we and not they, so that she would know it included him too. Thank you, Cleo said softly. She glanced down at their hands touching, and York saw the moment she shut down. She withdrew her hand from his, and the barrier that had gone down for a moment between them slowly rose again. How are things with Helen? Cleo asked. She was under the impression that York was still married. That explained why she was nervous about the contact, about the connection they had just forged. There is no thing with Helen, York admitted. Cleo frowned. What do you mean? She left years ago. She what? Cleo's eyebrows rose and her eyes danced with confusion. I thought... It happened a long time ago, between the times you were home to visit your family, so you missed the talk of the town and the scandal and the pity. York chuckled. The pity especially. He cleared his throat and drank more of his coffee. Everyone felt sorry for me, but they didn't know what to actually say to me. No one knew how to talk to me, just about me. But these things fade over time, and new things come up to keep their minds occupied. New gossip, new scandals. I'm so sorry, Cleo said, and her eyes were filled with sympathy, not pity, and York appreciated that. It had been difficult when Helen left. He'd known that something wasn't right between them. They'd fought more and more, not seeing eye to eye the way they used to, and then the fighting had stopped altogether. That was usually a bad sign. That usually meant there was nothing left to fight for anymore. York had thrown himself into the ranch, thinking that if he could give Helen a home that was worth it, she would see the efforts and understand how he felt. He'd been wrong. "How old was Braden when she left?" Cleo asked. It hurt to talk about it sometimes, but when Cleo asked, it wasn't so bad. He found it easy to talk to her, easier than with anyone else he'd talked to in the past 2 decades, when this topic came up. 3, York said, a toddler. "That's so sad," Cleo said. "How do you explain that to a child?" "It was tough," York admitted. But as time went on, he stopped asking about her, and later he couldn't even remember her. "He just knows life as we live it now. Me and him on the ranch, and we make it work." "And you?" Cleo asked. "What about me?" York asked, caught off guard. "It had to have been hard on you, too." You remembered, and in time, your memory of her didn't fade to nothing. York shrugged. No one had really asked him how he'd done in the years after Helen left. People were mostly just glad it wasn't a touchy topic anymore, that they didn't have to talk on eggshells around him. "I guess," York said. "It wasn't a pleasant situation, but we got through it the way we get through anything tough. We're made of serious stuff, and if we really put our minds to it, we adapt and survive." "You're very strong," Cleo said. "I know what my mom is like, and I couldn't imagine what she would be like if my dad—" She shook her head. York reached out again and took Cleo's hand in his. "That must be rough," he said. "It's the reason I moved," she admitted. York had figured as much, reading between the lines of what she'd said earlier. Somehow her confession felt like something special, something just between the two of them. "I'm glad you're back for now," York offered. "It's good to connect again." Cleo nodded and opened her mouth to say something, but her phone rang, cutting her off. She let go of York's hand and picked up her phone, frowning at the screen. "Mom?" she asked, concern in her voice. York could hear the panic in Elaine's voice, but not her words as she talked on the phone. Cleo's frown deepened before she looked up at York and made eye contact, her face riddled with worry. "I'll be right there," she said. "We'll find him." She ended the call and stood. "What's wrong?" York asked. "My dad. He's missing. He went out fishing earlier, but he didn't come back when he usually does, and Mom drove out there to find him. And he's gone." She squeezed her eyes shut. "I told her not to let him out, not to let him go by himself in his state, but she wouldn't listen." She pressed her hand to her forehead. "I don't even know where to start looking. I don't." "We'll find him," York said. He didn't have a plan yet, but he couldn't stand by and do nothing while Cleo was upset. "I'll drive," he offered. Cleo nodded, her jaw clenched, and they left the coffee shop. Her car stayed in the parking lot, and they got in his truck. They didn't talk as York drove them out of town. Cleo gave him directions, her fingers trembling as she typed in the address and handed him her phone. "Here," she said. "This is where Mom said he went fishing." York took her phone, glanced at the directions, and nodded as his gears started to turn. "We'll find him." "How do you know?" Cleo asked. "When people leave without telling anyone, it's because they have a plan," York said, "or at least a general idea of where they're going." He didn't go out without a plan or an idea. "He can't remember things, York." "How could he have a plan?" "Without a clear thought, we fall back on habit," York said. "I know what Thomas always did when he went fishing." "You do?" York nodded. "He took me and Braden out fishing when Braden was younger, helping me keep him busy." Thomas had been like a dad to York, a granddad to Braden when York thought he'd lost everyone. Braden hadn't had a mother or a grandfather to look up to, and Thomas had stepped in to fill the role. He was there for them whenever they needed him. "I didn't know," Cleo said softly. York glanced at her, wondering what she was thinking. How did she feel about Thomas filling a role in their lives? Cleo took her phone and dialed her mom's number, holding the phone against her ear. "I'm with York. We're headed out to the lake now," she said. "I'll call you if we find him." York has a plan. York couldn't hear Elaine's response, but Cleo ended the call and looked at him before she dropped the phone in her lap. "Mom is sure we'll find him now that you're involved." He didn't miss the bitterness in her voice and knew there were underlying emotions. He wanted to ask, but he wasn't going to push her when she was upset, and there wasn't much he could do about it now anyway. Thomas had been there for them in their time of need, and that was how things were. He couldn't change that, and he wouldn't apologize for it either, even if it seemed like Cleo was upset about it. Or maybe he had it all wrong. Again, he decided not to ask and focused on the road instead. Chapter 7. Cleo. York seemed to know what he was doing. Cleo had to trust him. Worry and fear gnawed at her, and all kinds of feelings of guilt swirled around in her stomach. She should have fought harder for her father to stay home, for Elaine to go with him, for Cleo herself to go with him. She'd known it was a bad idea for him to go out by himself, but she'd been furious with her mom and decided to vent about it instead. She should have done more, done better. She glanced at York. His face was serious, his eyes on the road as he drove toward the fishing spot. He kept running a hand through his graying blonde hair or tugging at his beard as if in thought. He didn't look at the directions on her phone once after he'd checked it the first time. It was clear he knew the way by heart. And why not? This was his home. This was where he'd grown up and lived his whole life. She didn't know Maplewood Grove as well as she used to because she'd been the one to move away. That was on her, and maybe on her mom, too. Still, it wasn't easy to just let it go that York and Thomas had spent so much time together. A bitter resentment lodged in her stomach when he said it. It seemed unfair that he'd had the time with her dad she wished she had, now that it was clear that time had run out. She'd gone to Chicago, never thinking that what she left behind might change, and now York was the one who held precious memories with her dad, and not her. "Where are we going?" Cleo asked when they arrived at the lake, but York didn't turn down the dirt road with a sign that pointed to the fishing spot. "There's a cleaning station a bit farther down," he said. "Everyone goes there to clean and gut the fish they catch. It's the first stop after pulling something out of the water." Cleo shook her head. Her dad had fished his whole life, but she'd never really wanted to go with him. Fishing had not been her scene. It was dirty, and staring at the water for hours on end with no action drove her crazy. And if he didn't catch anything? "We're going down the list," York said. "I'm trying to think the way he might be thinking." Cleo nodded. That made sense. They stopped at the fishing station and got out. The heat pressed down on them as they walked to the station, where a few fishermen worked on their fish. Guts and scales lay on the workstations, and the smell of fish, fermenting in the humid heat, made Cleo want to gag. York greeted some of the men like they were old friends, but Cleo didn't know them. Still, she squared her shoulders and stepped up right with him. "You haven't seen Tommy around here, have you?" York asked one of the guys after shaking his hand. "Tommy? He hasn't been here in months from what I know," someone else offered. "He didn't show face today?" York asked. They all shook their heads. "Okay, thanks," York said. "If you do see him, give us a shout, will ya?" The guys all agreed and glanced at Cleo with curiosity before they returned their attention to their fish guts. Cleo followed York back to his truck. "What now?" she asked. She was becoming more and more worried, the panic close to the surface. "Now we go to the next stop," York said. He was so calm in all of this, where Cleo felt like she was falling apart. "How are you doing this?" "Doing what?" he asked, getting into the truck. She climbed in next to him. "Being so calm, driving around looking for him when he's out there on his own somewhere." "I know him," York said. "It's going to be okay." "We'll find him." Cleo York's blue eyes were confident and reassuring, his tone gentle. She pursed her lips and nodded, and York pulled back onto the road, heading farther down. A moment later, they pulled into the parking lot of an older diner. The sign above simply said diner. "Martha Klein owns the diner, and she made it so that the men can come here with their loot. They cook the fish customers bring in over here, so we often come here after a good day on the water and have what we caught cooked up just right. It makes for a nice reward after being out in the sun, and we can exchange stories about the catch. York smiled at Cleo. "Oh," Cleo breathed and pointed. "Look, that's his truck." "So it is," York said. Cleo hopped out of York's truck and crossed the parking lot to where her dad sat in his truck, staring up at the diner. "Dad?" Cleo said, moving into his line of sight before knocking on his window so she didn't scare him. He looked at her with glazed eyes before he opened the door and stepped out. "Cleo?" At least he knew who she was. "Where am I?" "At the diner, Dad," Cleo said. He glanced up at the diner. "I don't know why I'm here." "It's okay, Daddy. You're okay." "Why are you here?" Thomas asked, looking at Cleo again with a frown. "I came to get you, Dad," Cleo said. "We came to make sure you're okay and take you home." "York is here too." York came up behind Cleo, and Thomas's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, York," he cried out. "It's so good seeing you." Cleo tried not to get jealous about how happy Thomas was to see York. York grinned, shaking Thomas's hand. "It's been too long, old friend." "We were at the cleaning station earlier." "Yeah, did you fish?" Thomas asked. Cleo glanced at York, but York took it in his stride. "Just said hi to the guys." "I haven't seen them in a while either. We should fish again sometime soon, like the good old days." "I'd like that," Thomas said. "I haven't fished in years." York and Cleo both looked at the fishing rods and gear in the back of Thomas's truck, but they said nothing. "Let's get home, Dad," Cleo said. "We should head back. Mom's cooking tonight, and we don't want to be late." "Oh, no, we don't," Thomas said. He looked up at the diner again. "I didn't spoil my appetite, did I?" "Your mother will be mighty unhappy if I did." Cleo smiled at her father, trying not to let his questions, his memory lapses, bother her too much. She didn't want him to know that something was wrong. "Why don't you drive home with your dad?" York suggested to Cleo. "I'll follow behind, make sure we all get back safe and sound." "Thank you," Cleo breathed, and Thomas nodded. They got into the trucks, York in his and Cleo with her dad, and drove slowly back into town. While they drove, Thomas chattered away about the season, the fish in the lake, and how good it was to see the guys again. Cleo listened intently, gasping in all the right places, but deep down, a sadness settled in. She hated that her dad suffered like this, that he was losing pieces of who he was. The only thing she could be grateful for was that he looked happy. It seemed he forgot all the bad things all the time, and that meant he could only focus on the good. To him, there was nothing else. When they arrived back at the house, it was nearly dark. Elaine came out of the house, her eyes red as if she'd been crying, but she put on a brave smile. "Just in time for supper," she called out, waving. Thomas walked to his wife and kissed her. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked. "Have you been crying?" "Oh, no," she said, waving a hand. "Allergies. You know how bad it gets this time of year." Thomas nodded and took her hand, kissing it. "Let's get inside then." He turned to Cleo. "Are you coming? York stay for dinner?" Before Elaine or Cleo could respond to the invite, York spoke up. "Thank you, Tommy, but Braden and I are having a guys' night tonight. I'll join you some other time." "I'm holding you to it," Thomas said. "Good night." York turned to Cleo after Elaine and Thomas went inside. "Let me drive you back to your car," he offered. "You've been driving me around most of the day," Cleo pointed out. "It's the least I can do to make sure you're all safe and sound at home." Cleo nodded, his kindness making her feel warm. York had done so much for them today, and he was steadfast and willing to help without once making her feel like they were in any way imposing. The drive back to the coffee shop, now dark and quiet after closing hours, was a quick one, and they didn't speak much. When Cleo got out and found her keys in her handbag, she turned to York. "I don't know how to thank you for today," she said. "I don't know how we would have found him without you." "You're welcome," York said. "I meant what I said when I offered to help. I know you're going through a tough time, so whenever you might need it, just let me know." "Thank you," Cleo said. "It means a lot to know I'm not in this completely alone." In the darkness of the night, only lit by a street lamp nearby, she felt wrapped in a cocoon of warmth and understanding with York. He was handsome, distinguished, and successful, but he was also so kind and caring. For the first time in a long time, Cleo felt like she had someone on her side, and it was a wonderful feeling. Foreign, but wonderful. "Take care now, Cleo," York said, "and I'll see you soon." She nodded. "You will." She wanted to see him again. She wanted to spend some time with him when it wasn't laced with an emergency. She'd known York for a long time, but she'd never seen this side of him. York lifted a hand and brushed it down her cheek before he opened the door for her, and Cleo shivered at his touch. She climbed into the car and he shut the door for her again before he headed toward his truck. Cleo turned over the engine and drove out of the parking lot with York following behind until he took the turnoff to head out of town to his ranch. Cleo took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She had been resentful of York and his relationship with her father, but without that, she didn't know how they would have managed to find Thomas today, and she couldn't fault York for having a good relationship with Thomas just because she'd withdrawn. She's left because of a lot, but escaping the bad had always meant sacrificing the good, and that was on her. Hard as it was to admit to it. When she pulled into the driveway at home, she sat in the car for a moment, just breathing in and out, preparing herself for what waited for her. Her father's condition, her mother's judgment. One thing was for sure, she wasn't going to leave soon. She needed to spend more time with her father. And if she was in town for a while longer, maybe it meant she could see more of York, too. Chapter 8. York. When York arrived back on the ranch, it was after 9 and Braden had already closed everything up and turned in. They always went to bed early so they could get up early, but despite his hard work and long hours, York wasn't tired. His mind was filled with Cleo. He headed toward the house, but instead of unlocking and letting himself in, he stopped on the lawn and looked up at the stars. A breeze blew through, rustling the trees and grass. It was peaceful, but York felt restless. He needed a way to work off his energy. He sat down and leaned back on his elbows. The stars were bright in the night sky. It was beautiful here, and York wondered how anyone could give up this kind of country life for the city. He'd been to Nashville a few times, and the city had its own kind of beauty, but nothing compared to the freedom out here, the wide open space and fresh air. He was happy here, and it was good for Braden, too. Cleo hadn't felt the same about it. He'd gotten the feeling today, after what she told him, that she'd been stifled in this life. It couldn't be easy being back home after she'd been gone for so long, and with Thomas being sick, it had to be even harder. York wasn't a stranger to hardship. There had been a time when he'd thought he had everything, a loving wife, a ranch inherited from his father that would bring him success and fulfillment, the kind of future most men dreamed of. That was before things had gone wrong between him and Helen, and eventually she'd left. It had left him shattered. He'd never really gotten over that. He'd loved Helen, and losing her and her love had almost destroyed him. He'd played it down when they'd talked about it over coffee today. It was easier to shrug it off and act like it hadn't mattered so much. Complaining about it, crying about it, being a mess because of it didn't change the facts, and somehow he'd made his way through the hard times. He'd had to for Braden, and Braden was what mattered most to him, and he was thankful he still had his son. York didn't often want for anything. His life was good as it was, and he didn't let himself think about things being different. He didn't allow himself to yearn for something he couldn't have, but after seeing Cleo today, York had made his way through life for years now without a relationship, a woman by his side. Just after Helen left, he didn't have what it took to fall in love again. He'd nursed his own wounds, and he'd raised Braden, and it had been a case of damage control. And then, after Braden had grown older and they'd found their stride, work became easier. York just hadn't looked for love since. Still, now that he thought about it, York couldn't deny that he'd felt more alive, more interested, more like himself today while spending time with Cleo. He wasn't sure how or why she had that effect on him, but it was impossible to ignore. He wanted to know her. He could admit that to himself. Maybe not out loud, but York wasn't in the habit of denying his emotions. The front door opened. "Oh, you're here," Braden said. "I was just wondering if I should head out to find you." "I didn't want to bother you," York said. "I thought you were sleeping." Braden nodded and frowned at York. "What are you doing?" "Lying on the grass," York said, stating the obvious, staring at the sky. Braden hesitated and looked up at the stars before he stepped off the porch and walked to York. He sat down on the grass and lay back, too, folding his arms under his head. They didn't speak. They just stared up at the sky, looking at the stars and the moon. "Did you find him?" Braden finally asked. When York had headed out with Cleo to find Thomas, he'd sent a message to Braden letting him know what was going on and that he'd be back late. "Yeah, he's getting pretty bad now." York nodded. "It's only a matter of time." "Yeah." Braden was quiet and York read the weight of the silence. Thomas was the only grandfather figure Braden had ever known, with York's own father passing away before Braden was born, and Helen's family dropping from the picture when she left. It had to be hard on Braden, too, although it had been a while since they'd spent a lot of time with Thomas. "How is Cleo coping with it?" Braden asked. "Must be hard." "It is," York agreed. "I don't know how well she's dealing with it." "It's tough coming back after being gone so long." Braden nodded. He didn't know Cleo as well as York did. He'd only met her once or twice when she'd come back for a visit, running into her in town by chance. "I think I want to help them," York said. "Yeah? How?" "Well, I don't know yet. But I can't let her fend for herself. If I can make things easier, I will." Braden hesitated. "You care about her?" York glanced at his son. "We all care about each other around here." "Well, yeah, but that's not what I meant." He looked at York, and York felt the weight of Braden's gaze. Braden wasn't a kid anymore, and he wasn't stupid either. He saw things, understood things the way an adult did now. "Yeah," York said, "I do." Braden nodded slowly. "She's great," York added, "but I don't know what I can offer her. She has her own life in Chicago. I don't know how long she'll be here." York didn't add that he didn't know if he could deal with it if he got attached and then she left again. It wouldn't be the same as with Helen. He'd expect it this time and guard his heart better. But that didn't mean that abandonment wouldn't hurt all the same. "I think you should see more of her," Braden said. York chuckled. "Do you now?" Braden lifted himself on one elbow. "Yeah, I do." "You care about her. She's obviously on your mind all the time." "How do you figure that?" York asked. Braden raised his eyebrows. "You're lying on the grass, staring up at the stars." "Come on, Dad. It's not rocket science that you're thinking about a girl." York laughed, feeling silly for it, but Braden was right. "I don't know if it's worth it," York said, his laughter fading and his tone becoming serious again. "You deserve it, you know," Braden said. York frowned and sat up, looking at his son, who sat up now, too. "You work your ass off all the time," Braden said. "You always give and you never take, and I think you should do something that makes you happy for a change. If spending time with her is what you want to do, then go on and do it." York smiled, shaking his head. "When did you grow up?" Braden chuckled and stood. "I'm going to get some sleep. You should too." York nodded. "I'll be right in." Braden walked back to the house as York stood and dusted off his jeans. He looked out over the fields at the cattle huddled together asleep in the distance and the barns that stood strong and solid. York was used to this life. It was predictable. It was his, and it had everything he could ever need. He loved his son and his ranch and his community. Maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe, after all these years, it was time for him to find love again. Or maybe not love. Maybe just companionship for now. Cleo would eventually leave, but while she was here, he wanted to spend more time with her. If he guarded his heart carefully, maybe it wasn't such a bad idea. Maybe Braden was right. After everything he'd been through, he deserved to do something that made him happy. Chapter 9. Cleo. Cleo had always loved her life. She built a successful company, she worked hard, and she'd been rewarded for it. And as long as she was in Chicago, she could mostly forget about the life she'd left behind in Maplewood Grove. Now that she was back, she'd been thinking about her life choices more and more. She didn't think that she'd done anything wrong in leaving. It hadn't worked with her mom, and if she'd gone in the direction her mom wanted her to go, she would never have been happy. Tanner's shop, the hardware store Thomas had started when he was young, was successful, but it had never been Cleo's dream to run it one day, to settle down, marry, have a bunch of kids, and run the store. It just wasn't in her future. She would have liked to have married, of course, maybe even had children, but that had never happened for her, and her company had become everything. "I said I don't want it!" Thomas's shouts came from the dining room. Cleo left her childhood room and hurried to where Thomas sat at the dining room table, his face twisted in a horrible scowl. A broken plate lay on the floor with eggs and bacon on the carpet. "You always have the same breakfast, dear," Elaine said, trying to stay calm, but Cleo could hear the tremble in her voice. Elaine was close to tears. "I don't." "How would you know? You don't even know me." "Can I help?" Cleo asked. "Who are you?" Thomas demanded. Oh, today was a very bad day. Cleo had only seen him have one of these before, where he didn't even know who Elaine was. It made him agitated when everything was different, and he was surrounded by people he didn't know. Cleo could understand it, but it still hurt. "No one," she said quickly, not wanting to make matters worse. "I'm just here to clean." She kneeled and picked up the broken plate, collecting the pieces before someone could hurt themselves. Elaine shot her a relieved look. "What would you like then?" she asked. "I want you to leave me alone," Thomas cried out. "What does a man have to do to find some peace and quiet around here?" "I want to speak to a manager." Elaine swallowed hard. "Leave this," she said to Cleo, her voice hoarse. "I'll do it." "No, Mom, I've got it," Cleo said. Before Elaine could argue with Cleo, Thomas stood. "Didn't anyone hear me? I want to be left alone. You," he pointed at Cleo, "get out." Cleo stared at him. "Thomas, she's not—" "It's okay," Cleo said. She wanted to flee just as much as Thomas wanted her gone, and whatever she did here would only aggravate him even more. "I have some shopping I need to do." She turned and left the dining room. Elaine followed her to the front door. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Some days are just—" She swallowed hard. "You don't have to go. This is your home." It was a rare moment when Elaine was vulnerable, so close to breaking down, and she didn't treat Cleo as the enemy. "You should consider getting help, Mom," Cleo said softly, "or take him somewhere they're equipped to deal with it." "I can help you look." "He's not going anywhere," Elaine said tightly. "If it gets worse, it might—" "No," Elaine insisted, her emotions packed away again, her stern attitude back. "You don't get to come to the place we've always called home and rip it apart just because you don't want to be here anymore." Cleo's jaw dropped. "That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to help." Elaine pursed her lips before she turned around and walked away. Cleo watched her go, shocked that her mom could say something like that. Cleo didn't have a choice. She had to leave. She grabbed her keys and headed out the door. She hadn't lied about needing to go shopping. The weather in the small ranching town just didn't allow for the dress suits and tailored clothes Cleo had become accustomed to always wearing, and she needed to add to her wardrobe. On the way, she called Donna. "Shop with me?" "Always," Donna said. "I could do with a couple of new things, too." They agreed on a place, and Cleo drove into town. She and Donna parked and met in the parking lot, then hugged. "I need your help," Cleo said. "With?" finding something to wear that's a little more suited to Maplewood Grove. Donna grinned. I'm on it. I know just the place. Come on. Cleo followed her friend into the tiny mall that served as the business hub and only shopping spot for the community of Maplewood Grove, and Donna led her into a large store with the kinds of clothing Cleo had in mind. Donna took clothing off the racks, passing items to Cleo, and she studied what her friend chose. Looser pants, blouses that were lighter in color, some with a subtle print, skirts. I forgot what the weather was like here, Cleo admitted. Yeah, it gets to you, even when this is something you live with every day. Donna stopped in front of a shelf with different shoes and tilted her head. What about sandals? Or better, flats at least, Cleo chuckled. Yeah, that might be a good idea. Until now, she'd worn the neutral colors and structured fabrics suited to the office, but it was time to look at breathable cotton clothes and bright colors. It just didn't feel right to keep walking around in suits. When she tried on the clothes, looking at herself in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. It had been so long since she'd become a businesswoman, she'd stopped defining herself as anything else. What would you suggest for something like a date night? Cleo asked. Donna blinked at her. What do you mean, a date night? Cleo shrugged. I don't know. Like something that might work for the evening. Donna narrowed her eyes at Cleo. Who are you planning to spend this date night with? Cleo blushed. It's just hypothetical. Okay, Donna said, her mouth curling into a smile and her eyes sparkling. Hypothetically, who are you planning to spend this date night with? Cleo laughed and scratched her head before running her hand through her hair, and she looked at herself in the mirror again. I don't know. Maybe York. York? Donna cried out, surprised. Hypothetically, Cleo added. Donna laughed. Right. A cardigan with that will work just fine. We don't do fancy out here, you know that. Cleo nodded, but Donna watched her and knew it wasn't over yet. So, you've been spending time together, huh? Cleo shrugged, trying to act nonchalantly. He's a nice guy. And he's been really helpful with my dad. He's a great guy, Donna corrected, and if you decide to be with him, you have my approval. Cleo snorted. Thanks for that. I'm serious, Donna said. He's a good guy and he's been through so much. He deserves a happy ending as much as you do. Cleo sighed, drawing the curtain to her dressing cubicle again so she could undress and put on her clothes while she talked. I hear what you're saying. I just don't know if I'm the one who will get that happy ending. It just doesn't seem to work that way for me. What are you talking about? You know my past, Cleo said as she got dressed. You know how long a relationship lasts for me. Just a couple of months. Sometimes just a few weeks. It's not like I've ever managed to have something serious last for much longer than that. That's just because you haven't met the right guy, Donna pointed out. Maybe. But York can't be the right guy. Cleo already felt like she'd made a mistake by mentioning York to Donna. She knew she could trust Donna and talk to Donna about anything, but now that she'd said it out loud, she knew that it couldn't work with York. She wasn't going to be in Maplewood Grove for much longer, and starting something with him when it would just have to end seemed wrong. Why not? Donna asked. Cleo told her what she thought, pushing the curtain open when she was dressed, but Donna shook her head. I don't agree with you. I know it's not always easy to figure these things out, but if you give it a chance, you might find ways around it that you didn't know were there before. Maybe. Cleo took the outfits she'd settled onto the cash register, where she waited for them to be rung up. I just don't know. It's not that simple. It is, Donna said. It doesn't have to be complicated. I live in Chicago, and he lives here, Cleo pointed out. He'll never move to the city. But you could come back, Donna said carefully. This isn't my home, Donna. It was, once, Donna said. Cleo nodded. Her friend was right. She'd started out here. What would stop her from coming back? But the answer to that was simple. Her relationship with her mother was just easier to deal with if they didn't live in the same home, the same town, the same state. Not to mention that her company was in the city. There was no room for a cosmetics company in a small town like Maplewood Grove. After their shopping spree, Cleo went back home. When she arrived, Thomas was asleep, and she quietly went to her room and unpacked her things. She got changed into clothes that were better suited for the weather and prepared to face her father again. But she couldn't do it, not with how things were today. So, instead of facing her family with its difficulties head-on, she called York. "Are you busy today?" she asked. "I have a list of things to get through," he admitted. Oh. Her heart sank. She'd hoped to have somewhere to escape to. "You could always join me if you want to get away," York offered. "I have to ride out to round up the cattle, and I remember you being pretty comfortable on horseback." Cleo grinned. "That was a long time ago. It's like riding a bike, right?" "Okay," Cleo said. "I'll be there in a few." "You might want to wear something other than a suit," York pointed out. "It won't work for riding." Cleo chuckled. "I got some clothes today. Don't worry, I won't try to put my feet into stirrups wearing pumps." York laughed, and she ended the call, grateful to have something to do, somewhere to go. And, she admitted to herself, she looked forward to spending some more time with him. Chapter 10. York. When the fancy Audi Cleo drove crunched up the gravel driveway, York smiled and walked out of the barn to meet her. She wore jeans that flattered her shape and a loose cream blouse that looked cool in the humid heat. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She stepped out of the car and her eyes met his, her smile making him feel warm. He loved her smile, how she didn't hide her enthusiasm, how she seemed genuinely happy to see him. "Hi," she said as she approached. "You got here fast." "I have a heavy foot, they tell me." York chuckled. "Come on, the horses are ready." He glanced at her shoes. The flats were much better than the pumps he'd seen her wear around town, but still wouldn't do. "I can let you use an old pair of boots Helen left behind if you're okay with that." "Sure," Cleo said, and he found them in a trunk at the back of the barn. He offered her a hat, too. With the cowboy hat and boots on, Cleo looked like she fit right in. She was comfortable, too, walking right into the stable and stroking the nose of a gray mare. York introduced her to the horses, the gray mare named Misty and a sorrel stallion named Ranger. Cleo was hesitant about riding him at first, but York showed her how to stay in control. "It's been years since I've done this," she said when they walked out of the barn, the horses calm as they headed into the fields. "You're a natural," he said as they rode out. The weather was perfect for a ride, warm but not stifling, the breeze just enough to keep the bugs away. They rode along the fields, following the creek. The sound of the water and the birds, the rustle of the leaves, the sun shining on their skin. It all felt so good, and he was happy to have her with him. "There's nothing quite like it, is there?" "No," he agreed. "I could get lost out here." "That's why my dad built the house where he did, too. It's a nice house." "A lot of memories," York said. "I don't know if I said it then, but I'm sorry about your dad's passing." "Oh, it's years ago now. We had a difficult relationship. Can I ask you something?" "Sure," York said, glancing at Cleo. Strands of dark hair had escaped her ponytail and blew around her face, her cheeks pink. "Were you relieved when he was gone?" The question pulled him up short. "I don't mean to be rude," Cleo added quickly. "And I know you'd never wish something like that on anyone, but after how things were between you—" "I understand what you mean," York said, "and I don't know if I have to be truthful. His death brought a lot of pain, and I felt guilty for a long time that we never straightened things out between us. His death was so sudden, York's father had died of a heart attack. One day, he was out on the ranch, going about his business as usual, and the next, he was gone. It's not an excuse, of course. We never know how long we have, and there was a lot of regret I had to make my peace with." He considered it carefully. "I guess no would be my answer. I wasn't relieved he was gone. It changed a lot for me, and the difficult times were over, but I wish I could have fixed things before it was too late." Cleo nodded, her lips pursed into a thin line, her mind working. He could see she had a lot on her mind, and it was weighing her down. "What happened?" York asked. Cleo glanced at him. "I didn't come here to bother you with my sob stories." She tried to laugh, but it was humorless. "I don't mind. It helps to talk sometimes, just to get it off your chest, even if you don't get an answer necessarily." Cleo nodded. "I guess so." She took a deep breath. "My dad's having a really bad day." She explained how her morning had started, how her father had acted, and how she'd been chased out of the house. "I'm so sorry," York said. He wished he could help her somehow, make it better for her. "It's okay," Cleo said, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "I can't say it's getting easier with him being like this, but at least now I know what to expect, which wasn't the case before. I'm more upset about my mom and how she acted like I was the villain by wanting to help my dad." "It's a tough call to make," York said. "Taking him away from the only life he's ever known might be harder on him than you think, even if he doesn't always know where he is or who you are. I just wanted to make it easier on my mom." She doesn't show it, but she's slowly getting closer and closer to the breaking point, and it's not fair on her that she has to struggle with this when there are people who are trained to deal with it. A place where my dad can be safe and won't get lost or need to be watched like a hawk all the time in case something goes wrong. York nodded. She had a point. "What would you have done?" Cleo asked. He considered it, thinking long and hard. Losing his father to a heart attack had been a blessing in disguise only because he hadn't suffered. It was over so quickly. But what if he had suffered? What if his health had slowly deteriorated? "It's hard to say since I'm not in that situation, but I might have considered the same thing," he said honestly. "But I do know it's a tough call to make, and it will cause a lot of things to be different for your mom, too." Cleo nodded, and they rode in silence for a while until they found the cattle in the far field. They worked together, each riding up on either side of the cattle, driving them closer to the ranch house, and there was no time for talking. It was exhilarating, the horses giving it their all as they ran next to the herd. On the other side of the herd, Cleo was on her horse and just as invested as York was. He didn't miss the smile on her face. This was the only life York had ever known. It was a hard life with a lot of hard work, but Cleo didn't seem to shy away from hard work. Could she fit in here? The moment York thought it, he berated himself. She had a life in Chicago. She wasn't happy here. Just being home had already showed that it was tough for her to be back. Would she really want to give up her life in the city to be here again with him? After they'd closed the cattle in the right field, they headed back toward the stables. "Thank you," Cleo said when they were almost at the stables. "For what?" York asked. "For today." "For helping me clear my head." "Any time," York said. They stopped in the stable, and York hopped off the horse and reached up to help Cleo down. Her hand slid onto his shoulders, and his went to her waist. When she was back on solid ground, he didn't let her go. "What is it?" he asked. She stared at him, her expression changing. York swallowed hard. There was a spark between them. It was hot and sizzled, a flame that flared brightly. He was aware of every part of her body, where her waist curved into her hips, her hands on his shoulders, her eyes watching him, her mouth and how full and pink her lips were. He wanted to kiss her. Her eyes slid to his lips, and he knew she wanted it too. For a moment, he considered it, leaning forward. But he stopped himself. What if he got attached to her, lost his heart to her, and she left him? She cleared her throat, and York let her go. "You know, if you ever need to escape, there is always space for you here," York said, and he meant it. "I know it's tough sometimes, and if you can't go home, you can be here." "Thank you," Cleo said softly, and she smiled at him with warmth. She walked toward her car, and before York could think twice about what he was doing, he called out, "Would you like to have a picnic with me sometime?" Cleo looked surprised, but she didn't hesitate before she nodded. That could be nice. Maybe we'll head out with the horses again? Perfect, York said. Cleo smiled at him, a bright smile that made his skin tingle before she got into her car. He watched her drive away. He might not have kissed her, but there was definitely something between them. Something warm and caring. Something different than what he'd had before. Chapter 11. CLEO. The moment Cleo got into her car, her phone pinged with an email. She glanced at the screen. It was from Lydia. She frowned but focused on the road that took her back home. When she parked in her parents' driveway, her phone pinged again. Before she could read the email, her phone rang. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Lydia said the moment Cleo answered. It couldn't wait. "What is it?" I asked. "I emailed you a couple of documents. There's a problem with the new line. A few different people have complained about an allergic reaction, specifically from the hypoallergenic products." "Oh, no," Cleo said, rubbing her fingers against her forehead, stress settling in her stomach. "That doesn't make any sense. Do we know what the problem is?" "Not yet," Lydia said. "I'm in over my head here. I'm not sure what to do. Let's recall all the hypoallergenic products as quickly as we can. Send out an apology and a voucher or a gift basket or something to those we know were affected, and talk to the lab. We have to get to the bottom of this as soon as we can. She wanted to say that she would meet with the head of sales to brainstorm a new direction, but she was far from home and couldn't do that right now. "I'll reach out to Daniel, see if we can schedule an online meeting, perhaps." "Okay," Lydia said. "Let me know what you can manage. I know you're going through a tough time, but the company needs you here, Cleo. If you can get back, the sooner the better." "I can't get back right now," Cleo said, squeezing her eyes shut. "But let's see what we can do right now and then take it from there." They ended the call, and Cleo took a deep breath, letting it out with a shudder. The day with York had been amazing. It had allowed her to forget about her stresses, about her difficulties at home, and just escape. She'd started to feel more and more at home again here, in a town she'd believed could never be home to her again. But this was a harsh reality check. She had to go back to Chicago. The life she'd created for herself there waited for her and her business. Her livelihood was there. She'd allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find some kind of happiness here. With York, it was so easy to feel the way she did. He was a balm to her soul, but it couldn't last. She had to go back. She had to keep reminding herself that her life wasn't here. It hadn't been for a long, long time. She was just here for a short while, and then she would return to Chicago, back to reality. When she walked into the house, she braced herself. This morning had been hard, with her father being in a terrible state, and she hadn't had the best run with her mother either. Tension still hung thick in the air, but the house was quiet. "Hello?" she called out, not raising her voice too much. Elaine appeared in the kitchen door, apron around her waist and wooden spoon in hand. "You're back," she said tersely. "I am." Elaine nodded once and turned her attention back to her pot. Cleo took that as an invitation to come closer. She walked to the stove and glanced into the pot. It looked like she was making stew. "Where's Dad?" she asked. "In the garden," Elaine said. "He's been working in the greenhouse. Says the vegetables have grown too tall." They stood in silence for a moment. "I'm not trying to send Dad away," Cleo said carefully. "Then what are you trying to do?" Elaine snapped. "I'm trying to do what's best for him," Cleo said. "This is his home. It's where he's always been. It's the only home he knows, and that's exactly why he should stay here." "I'm not saying he shouldn't," Cleo said. "I'm just worried about the toll it's taking on you, and I'm worried about his well-being." "What happened the other day when he went fishing?" "It can only get worse from here, Mom." Elaine pursed her lips without answering, and it looked like she wanted to cry. The change in her demeanor caught Cleo off guard. "I've done the best I can." Elaine finally said, her voice small. I know, Mom, Cleo said, putting her arm around her mother's shoulder, and I'm not blaming you. Not at all. You've been an amazing caretaker, but now it's time to start thinking about the future. It's time to get some help to ensure Dad is taken care of the way he needs. It's not the right decision for Dad to stay here. I really don't want to fight with you, Mom, but you're not being reasonable. Her mother didn't answer her. She just kept staring into her pot. Cleo gave her another squeeze, then stepped away, letting what she said sink in. This conversation was going better than she'd thought it would, and maybe, if her mom considered the next step, things could finally turn around for them. I need you in the store tomorrow, Elaine said. Cleo frowned. What for? To run it. Cleo shook her head. I'm not involved in the store. I wouldn't know what to do. Not to mention the fact that she wasn't interested in knowing what to do. Elaine narrowed her eyes at Cleo, the emotional moment between them gone. You own a business, don't you? It's not the same, Mom, Cleo said, making sure her voice was soft and patient. She was the CEO of a large company, overseeing a lot of different facets of production. It wasn't the same as a mom-and-pop hardware store, with one person behind the counter and a two-dimensional sales initiative. If you own a business, you know how to run a business, Elaine said. Cleo opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. What was the use? Arguing with her mother wasn't going to make her understand. All right, she said. I'll help out. But just for one day. I have plans the day after. With who? Elaine asked. Does it matter? Elaine narrowed her eyes at Cleo, so she sighed. York? And what do you aim to accomplish with that? Cleo shook her head. I'm old enough to decide who I want to spend time with, Mom. Elaine only pursed her lips and nodded, turning her attention back to her pot. Cleo wanted to be there for her mother, but being a part of the shop was a sore point. It was one of the reasons Cleo had left all those years ago. Elaine had had expectations that Cleo didn't want to follow through on. She'd always had her own dreams, her own goals, and Elaine was too traditional to support them. Still, she was in Maplewood Grove and staying with her parents again for the time being. She had said that she wanted to help her mother out. If running the shop was how she could do it, then that was what she would do, even if it was a sore point. That's how she ended up in Tanner's Hardware and Tools, standing behind the counter in her new jeans and boho chic blouse. She was grateful she'd bought the clothes she had, so she didn't have to work in her usual heels and dress suits. This was a different world, and the clothing that usually worked in Chicago just didn't cut it here. The day was slow and uneventful, and she was bored out of her mind. There was nothing to do, and it was the perfect opportunity to get back on the ball with her business, working on documents or catching up on meetings, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Her mind drifted and her emotions were all over the place, realizing how her dad was suddenly going downhill. She worried about him. She should have come to visit him sooner. She might have if she'd known how bad it was. And with that thought returned a wave of bitterness toward Elaine for sugarcoating the facts. It felt like everything was falling apart and there was nothing she could do about it. She hadn't even had time to prepare for it. Her business was struggling, her family was in turmoil, and the guy that was quickly stealing her heart wasn't a real option. She couldn't afford to fall for a man who lived in a world she would soon be leaving behind again. That didn't change the fact that she couldn't stop thinking about York. The bell above the door jingled with a customer, and a tall, broad man with graying hair and a beard walked in. His clothes were stained with oil, and he wore coveralls that he tied around his waist. Well, this is a nice surprise, he said when he walked in. If it isn't the little Tanner girl. Cleo narrowed her eyes. It took her a moment to realize who she was looking at. Sam? He grinned. The one and only. It's been years. He might have gotten older, but now that she recognized him, so much about him was exactly the same, albeit a little grayer and more distinguished. What can I get you? A new wrench set, he said. Mine's just about had it. I worked that set to within an inch of its life. Still working at the lot? I own it now, Sam said with a grin. The old man declared himself a sleeping partner and let me take over. Let me tell you, the sleeping party's got down pat. Cleo laughed, shaking her head. The last time she saw Sam, he was a mechanic in training. To know he owned the business now, having taken over from his father, who'd been labeled the best mechanic in Tennessee, was a big deal. She walked to the back and retrieved one of the wrench sets for Sam. After making sure that was all, she rang it up. "It's nice to see you back," Sam said. Cleo hesitated. She was about to tell Sam she wasn't back per se, but she decided not to say anything. "It will always be where I started out, you know," she said instead. "Roots," Sam said with a grin, but his smile faded. "I'm sorry about your dad." Cleo smiled brightly, trying to ignore the pang that shot through her when he mentioned it. "We're figuring it out. It's not over until it's over, right?" "Right," Sam said reassuringly, but they both knew that with dementia, things only got worse. It didn't get better. "I'll see you around," he said, waving at her when he left the store. Cleo leaned on the counter. Her customer-friendly smile faded into a sigh, and she dropped her head into her hands. When she was just about ready to scream of boredom, it was time for her lunch break, and she fled the store. She'd brought sandwiches along, but she wasn't in the mood for one. Instead, she just went for a quick walk around town to stretch her legs and have a change of scenery. The bookstore right next to the coffee shop had a sale sign in the window, so Cleo dropped in. The air-conditioned store was welcoming. "Hello," said a woman from behind the counter. "Are you looking for anything specific?" "Just something to drive away the boredom," Cleo said. "Then fiction is your best bet," the woman said. She had big curls that cascaded over her shoulders, and her roots were graying. Despite her aging look and the lines that fanned out around her eyes, she had a youthful, almost mischievous expression, and Cleo liked her right away. What about a romance? With a handsome rogue and a woman who is far from being a damsel in distress. Cleo laughed. "That sounds like my kind of story." "They're the best kind," the woman said. "I'm Lila." "Cleo." Lila went to fetch the new bestseller that had just hit the shelves. The cover was adorned with roses, candlelight, and a woman in a dress. It looked like a complete cliché. Maybe that was exactly what Cleo needed. She bought the book. "If you love it, I have a lot more where that came from," Lila said. "And if you want to talk about the story, I happen to love doing that, too. I can talk about books all day." Cleo chuckled. Lila was endearing, and it drew Cleo in. The more she met the townsfolk, the more she felt at home. She shook off the thought. She couldn't think like that. When she left the store, she ran into York, who was just passing by. "Hey now," he said with a lopsided grin that made Cleo feel a little unbalanced. "Are you following me?" "Oh no," Cleo said. "I was just kidding," York said and laughed. "But I was about to say that's a pity. I would have liked seeing more of you." Cleo blushed brightly, and York smiled at her. It made her stomach erupt in butterflies, and she tried wildly to control it. "About that picnic," he said. "Best to make set plans, or time just passes you by." "That's true," Cleo said. "And I kind of told my mom I was busy with you tomorrow, so I can't run the store." York blinked at her, and she felt silly, blushing again. "What?" "It was just an excuse, but if you're free—" York laughed. "Well, tomorrow it is then. I gotta say, it's much easier to arrange a date when the woman has already decided on it." Cleo giggled, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks yet again. What was wrong with her? With York, she couldn't keep her composure, and she didn't know why. "Meet me at the ranch at 11? Cleo nodded. "Perfect." "Until then," he said, giving her a charming wink before heading on his way. Cleo smiled to herself, feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. She hoped York didn't think she was too forward, but his reaction had been a positive one, and she really looked forward to seeing him for their picnic. She knew it might have been that she was coming on too strong. What was she playing at, going on a date with him? That had been the word he'd used, but Cleo hadn't wanted to correct him. After all, they weren't just friends. Still, was she playing with fire by doing this? She should have canceled the picnic or not mentioned anything about what she'd said to her mom. She should have been more composed, but with York, that was impossible. Besides, she wanted to see him again, and Cleo didn't want to fight that when, right now, he was the only point of light in a world that felt increasingly dark to her. Chapter 12. York. The moment the florist opened, York walked through the door. "Well, good morning to ya," Paul said from where he arranged flowers in a window display for the day. "You're here early." "My first customer isn't usually until about noon." York shrugged. "Early bird catches the worms, eh?" Paul nodded. "That's how the saying goes. What can I get for you?" York glanced at the different flower arrangements. He wanted to get Cleo something to show her what he felt for her, but he didn't want to come across too strongly. Were flowers too much as it was? "I don't know," he admitted. Paul gave him a pointed look. "That makes it a little harder to find something for you." I know. York sighed. "I'm going on a date, and I want to get her flowers, but not something that will be too much. It's not that serious yet, so I can't have it be something over the top like roses." Paul said, rubbing his chin. "What about this one?" He took a bouquet from a bucket for water. "It's all the local wildflowers, asters, goldenrods, daisies. Natural, free, not too heavy on the symbolism, and it's unlikely you'll find something like this in a fancy hothouse." York nodded. "Perfect, thank you. I'll take that one then." Paul walked to the counter with the bouquet to ring it up. "Who's the special lady?" "I don't think you know her." "She won't be in town for very long, so I want to show her a good time." It didn't sound nearly the way York felt about it, but he wasn't going to elaborate on that. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "Glad I could help. I won't be here for much longer, you know." "What?" York asked, confused. "Why?" "Time to retire. My fingers don't do what they used to with this arthritis, and I'm tired, York." "Who will run the shop?" York asked, looking around at the flowers that Paul so carefully arranged every day. "Ellie said she'd help until I can find a buyer, so I don't just shut my doors. I was hoping she would buy it, but she's not interested." Eleanor Mitchell was an avid gardener, and she specialized in flower arrangements for special occasions, but she ran her business from the hothouse in her garden. "It's nice of her to step in," York said. "I hope you find someone soon." "Me too," Paul said. "I'd hate for all my hard work all these years to go to waste just because I can't find a buyer." "You'll find someone." Paul looked skeptical, and York knew why. Maplewood Grove was a small community, and if there were no buyers in town, it would be hard to find someone from out of town to take over. Still, there was always hope, and Paul had a good thing. He'd built a reputation. Someone was bound to step up. He just knew it. "Thanks again," York said and held up the flowers. "Here's to hoping this was the right call." "Just be careful." York's eyebrows rose. "Why do you say that?" "I don't know the details of your situation, but I don't think it would be good for you to get too attached. She sounds like she has her own life if she's not in town for long." York nodded, not sure if he wanted to say any more. Paul had a point, but it was too late. He was already getting attached, and he didn't want to scare her off now. He liked spending time with her. Could he deal with it just being temporary? At 11, Cleo arrived in her Audi A6 and got out. She wore comfortable jeans and a loose top that flattered her figure, with her dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. She looked perfect. "Hey," she said as she walked up. "Hello," York said and held out the flowers. "These are for you." Cleo blushed as she accepted the flowers, pressing her nose into them and breathing in deeply. "Thank you, they're beautiful." York grinned at her. "I wanted to find something that reminded me of you." Cleo looked up, her blush deepening. "Are you ready to go?" York asked. "Yes." They made their way to the stables and got onto the horses they'd been out on before. Cleo looked more comfortable on horseback this time, and the wind picked up around them, cooling down the humidity of the day. They headed in the direction of the pond, which was surrounded by tall trees that cast a canopy over the water and hid them from view. "This is beautiful," Cleo said as she stopped her horse and stared out at the water. York slid down off his horse and tied it to a nearby tree. He went over to help Cleo down, and they settled on the grass by the water. York brought the basket and spread the blanket out. "What did you make us?" Cleo asked, looking excited. York smiled as he handed her a container and she peeled it open. "Chicken salad and croissants." He hesitated. "Ben at the bakery helped me make it, and Maggie from next door dropped off a big container full, so I can't tell you that I made it myself." "It looks great. I could get used to eating like this." They ate, and York leaned back on one elbow. "So, tell me about your life in Chicago," he said. "Running your own business must be tough." Cleo nodded, swallowing her bite. "It's not easy keeping all the balls in the air, but I built myself up from nothing, so it's second nature by now. Although, lately..." Her voice trailed off. "What is it?" York asked. "I just feel like I've been dropping some of those balls," she said quietly. "There's some difficulty with the company." "Nothing too serious, a product recall and an ingredient that needs to be found. But I'm not there to handle it, and that makes it harder." She didn't look up at York, and he could tell she was struggling with it. "I'm sure you can get it back into shape soon, right?" he asked. "I think so," she said. "But I don't know how long I'll still be here, and that's making it harder. I don't want to leave my mom and dad behind with how things are now, but I don't want to have to sacrifice what's important to me because of this. It feels like I'm right back where I started, having to choose between my family and my dreams." York frowned. "Why would you have to choose?" "Can't you have both?" Cleo snorted. "If only it were that simple. But no, my mom has other ideas about what I should be doing with my time. She defines success as me doing what she says, not what I achieve on my own. I just don't want to be a hardware store owner and have my future planned out for me all the time, you know?" York studied her, thinking about it. He knew she had a tough time with her mom, but he hadn't ever pried into the nitty-gritty of it. Now, he wondered, have you tried talking to her? "Of course I've talked to her," Cleo said, frustrated. "I've tried. She never listens. We fight, I walk away, we don't talk about it, and it builds up again." "I'm sorry. It's not your fault. I'm sorry that it's hurting you. You should always be able to live out your dreams, and the people in your life are supposed to support you no matter what. At least that's what I believe. Not everyone feels the same way." Helen left, not agreeing with what we had either, but I don't think that's the same. "Why not?" Cleo asked. "She wasn't happy," York said, "and it became toxic even for Braden, who loved her. We didn't fit, and we were holding her back, or so she thought. You don't feel like that, do you? Like you're stuck here, and you need to break free?" Cleo shook her head. "No, not at all. I used to, but things are different now." She glanced up at York, and her hazel eyes were deep and filled with sincerity. "I'm glad I'm here." York nodded. "I'm glad you're here too." They looked into each other's eyes, and York realized just how close they were, his heart beating faster in his chest. Cleo seemed to realize the same thing. She leaned in, and York's pulse sped up. She was so close he could smell her sweet scent. His hand touched hers, sliding together, and he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. He wasn't sure who moved first, but he was aware of his breath catching as her lips brushed his, and his other hand rose to cup her cheek. He closed his eyes, their noses touching. It was slow, sensual, and he savored every moment. Her lips were soft and inviting, and he lost himself in the kiss, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Oh my God," she said quietly, her words coming out against his lips. He pulled back a bit. "What is it?" "That was..." "Amazing," he finished. "Yes," she agreed. "I don't know where this is going," York admitted. "I know there is a lot to still hash out, but I want you to know that I like you." I can't stop thinking about you, and I want to see more of you." "I feel the same way," Cleo said softly. "I don't know what the future will hold, but for now, can we just be here? In the moment?" York nodded. He wanted nothing more than that, but he was still worried about the future. He could tell himself as much as he wanted that this wasn't permanent, and that at some point he would have to say goodbye. His head was screwed on right, and theoretically it was a matter of knowing there was an expiration date. The problem was that he wasn't sure his heart was on board with that idea, and he wasn't sure if that would become a problem. Still, despite his fears and worries about what the future would hold, he leaned in another time and kissed her. Because, he told himself, he'd rather have this here, now, and have it end one day than not have it at all. Chapter 13. Cleo. It was hard to imagine that Cleo could be so happy. When she'd returned to Maplewood Grove, she'd loathed the idea of seeing her mother again, of spending time in her childhood home. When she'd realized how sick her father really was, it had only made things worse. She'd felt betrayed by her mother, and she'd thought the old wounds would open and she'd spend her time here picking at scabs. Instead, she'd found comfort in her childhood home, not necessarily in her mother's presence, but despite it. It was surreal, and she wasn't sure how to handle feeling the way she did, but she was happy to be there, despite the circumstances. And it was all because of York. He'd made her forget everything else, and for a while the rest of the world had seemed to melt away. Her struggles at home, her struggles with the company, none of it mattered when they were together. Cleo had been in a few relationships, but none of them had lasted very long. She'd always felt like she'd been misunderstood, and juggling a relationship and keeping someone else happy was just another demand on her time. With York, everything was different. When they were together, it worked. They didn't have to speak. Their silence was just as warm and comfortable as when they told each other everything, and they really could talk about it all. Not only lighthearted joking, but deep conversations too. York was easy to open up to, and she'd never had that before. They understood each other. Even when he didn't say much, he was so expressive. She knew his smile was genuine, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes when he listened to her. And she wanted to give him that, too. She wanted to listen to him and know that she was making him smile. "Cleo!" Elaine's sharp cry yanked her out of sleep in the middle of the night, and Cleo blinked into the darkness of her childhood bedroom. What time was it? "The ambulance is here," Elaine said. That woke Cleo up completely. "What? Why?" "Your father fell," Elaine said over her shoulder, running back to the room. "I can't get him to wake up." Cleo ran after her mother. The paramedics were already with Thomas, who lay on the floor, his eyes closed, body twisted awkwardly. "Oh my God," Cleo said, clasping her hands to her mouth. "Is he going to be okay?" The EMTs didn't respond. Instead, they worked quickly and efficiently to get Thomas strapped to a gurney. Then they carried him out of the house. "I'll drive us," Cleo said to her mom, already pulling on a robe before she grabbed her car keys. Elaine put on a thick coat and they got into the car. The ambulance wailed, speeding toward Maplewood Grove Clinic, and Cleo was right behind it, skidding on the road as she took the corners way too fast. Her mother clung to the door, her knuckles white and her face pale. Cleo's heart pounded in her chest as they hurried down the sterile, dimly lit corridors of the clinic to the waiting room. They were doing all kinds of tests, and the wait felt worse than the initial panic. Cleo couldn't sit. She paced, her mind whirling. There had to be something she could do, some way to make things right. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. Her dad wasn't supposed to leave her. She'd only just gotten to spend time with him again. This couldn't be too late. It couldn't be the end. "Mom," she said, turning to face her. Her mother looked up at her, her eyes rimmed red and swollen. Cleo's heart lurched. She'd never seen her mother so fragile before, so broken. "I know we didn't agree, and I know you were angry," Cleo began, her words coming out in a rush. "But I'm sorry. I want you to know that I love you and I'll do whatever I can to make sure Dad will be okay. Elaine sniffed, shaking her head. It's too late. Cleo's brow furrowed. No, it isn't. You can forgive me, Mom. We can move on. Elaine shook her head, her chin trembling. Cleo tried to say something more, but a doctor appeared and Elaine jumped up. Her voice rose and fell in volume as she asked the doctor questions about her husband's condition. Cleo didn't want to ask, and she was afraid to know the answer. The only thing she could do was follow, and she was helpless. The doctor looked back at Elaine. He has a brain aneurysm, and it burst. What? Cleo asked, shocked. Did you know about this? Elaine shook her head, ignoring Cleo and talking to the doctor instead. We're not done yet. We were going to schedule surgery. Why didn't you tell me? Cleo cried out, horrified. Were the betrayals ever going to end? When will you operate? Elaine asked, still ignoring her daughter. I'm afraid we can't, the doctor said, and he looked sincerely apologetic. His dementia is too advanced, and from his records it looks like he's been battling with it for a while, and it will confuse him more than he can deal with. Elaine's face fell, and tears welled in her eyes. So you're just going to leave him like that? It doesn't have to be the end, the doctor said. We'll do what we can to make him comfortable, and when we know he's stable, we'll take the next steps. He's in good hands here, Elaine. Elaine's face crumpled and she covered it with her hands, sobbing. Cleo stared at her mother and then at the doctor, stunned by the news. She hadn't known about her father's condition. Why wasn't she told? Cleo couldn't believe that she hadn't known, that her mother had kept the secret from her. How had they become so disconnected? You can see him now, the doctor said gently. He's not awake, but it will help if you're with him. Elaine nodded, and the doctor led them to a room where Thomas was tucked into bed, all kinds of machines hooked up to him. A monitor beeped consistently, indicating his heart rate. Cleo gasped when she saw him. Thomas, usually so tall and upright and proud, looked like a shell of himself, thin and frail in the hospital bed. The room was a stark contrast to the chaos of her emotions. They sat down next to the bed, and Cleo took her dad's hand. Elaine was rigid beside her, eyes fixed on her husband. The distance between them was growing more and more, years of unresolved conflict, like a wall. Cleo watched her dad's face, willing him to wake up. He didn't. A pang of guilt shot into her chest. She'd run away from Maplewood Grove, from her home, looking for her own life and to get away from her mom. But by doing that, she'd sacrifice precious moments with her father that she would never get back. How could you not tell me? She whispered, unable to look away from Thomas. I thought I was doing what was best for him, Elaine said, her voice thick. And for you. No, Cleo said, turning her gaze to her mother. You were being selfish. You never wanted to acknowledge that something could happen to him, that he could die. You never wanted me to know. You chose to leave, Elaine said, to live my life. In Chicago, far away from your family, from the people who care about you. You never wanted to hear my side, Cleo said. You wanted me to do what you wanted, but that's not how it works. Your father needed you. No, Cleo said, taking her gaze from her mother, focusing on Thomas. Dad knew I was doing this for me, not for you. And he understood. What's done is done, Elaine said, her tone cold. But now we have to focus on the store. Cleo bristled. Can we talk about that later? Elaine only pursed her lips, and Cleo squeezed her dad's hand tighter. She closed her eyes and rested her head on the bed. She thought about the past, about her life growing up, her dad's laughter, the way it used to fill their home. Maybe Cleo slept. When she lifted her head again, the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, and it brought a hush to the room. Thomas's breathing, steady until now, faltered. Oh no, Elaine whispered. Dad? Cleo asked, and her voice cracked. Thomas's breathing stopped altogether and the monitors flatlined, a piercing final cry of the end. Elaine stared emotionlessly at her husband, her expression unreadable. But Cleo's world crumbled around her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the nurses ran into the room and switched off the monitors. "I can't do this," she said, and stood, leaving the room. The day passed slowly, time stretching out thin. Cleo was home alone, her mother still at the hospital. Cleo wanted to be there, to be a part of whatever would follow, but her mother had made it clear that she wasn't wanted. How could she not have told Cleo about the aneurysm? How could she have treated her like she wasn't a part of this family? Cleo had left because she wanted to live her own life, not because she didn't want to be a part of the family. To Elaine, clearly, there was no middle ground. Either Cleo took over the hardware store, helping her father there, or she lived her own life cut off from everything that made her a Tanner. Those were the only two options. Now that her father was gone, Cleo struggled with the idea that if she'd stayed, she might not have had her own life, but she'd have had all the time in the world with her father. She sat in the dimly lit living room of her childhood home, surrounded by memories that now felt like ghosts around her. Her heart ached with the loss of her father. Her grief was so profound it threatened to consume her. There was a soft knock at the door. At first, Cleo didn't want to answer it. She wasn't ready to see anyone, but when the knock sounded again, she opened it. York stood there, his eyes filled with concern and sorrow. "Cleo," he said in a hoarse voice, "I heard about Thomas. I'm so sorry." His voice was barely more than a whisper. Cleo managed a weak nod, struggling to bite back her tears. York stepped into the house and reached out to Cleo, closing the distance. She let him wrap his arms around her, and she let go, letting him hold her up when it felt like her knees would buckle and she was going to collapse. York was strong, his arms a frame holding her up, and his warmth was soothing, although it couldn't ease the pain. "I want to be here for you, Cleo," he said softly. "Whatever you need." His voice was steady, and yet it was laced with emotion. Cleo's body trembled. She'd never felt pain like this before. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back. "I don't know if I can do this." York looked hurt. "Do what?" "I just can't pretend like everything is okay," she said. "It isn't okay," he said, "but you can lean on me. You can rely on me. I'm not asking you to pretend." Cleo looked up at York, and for a moment she saw a different life, one filled with love and understanding, one so different from the path she'd had to walk so far. But the reality of their words, so different, crashed down on her like a wave. "I'm so glad you're here," Cleo said. "You have no idea what it means to me." "I'll always be here," he said. "Even when you didn't know it, I was always there." "York," Cleo said, and fresh tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't want to have to choose. But how could they make this work? York nodded, his eyes shining. He didn't say anything more, just leaned in and kissed her forehead, the tender touch lingering. When he pulled back, his expression was stoic, but his eyes held so much sadness, it nearly broke her. "I have to go back." "What?" "Back to the city," Cleo said. "I have a lot of work, and I can't stay here." "My mother doesn't want me anyway." York frowned. "Don't say that, Cleo. She's upset. You're all upset. You just lost your father. You don't have to leave." Cleo shook her head and turned away from York. She couldn't look at him. His eyes, the way he looked at her, were too much to bear. "I'll be here for you," he said. Cleo nodded. "I know. But I can't be here. I can't do it, York." York took a deep breath and sighed. Cleo didn't know what to say. He didn't understand. How could he? It was clear in his eyes. York's life was perfect. He'd had what everyone else dreamed about, the picture-perfect life with no pressure and a happy childhood. Cleo had never had that, and it was all because of her mom. "Isn't there a part of you that wants to stay?" York asked. "We have something special. You can't tell me we don't." "Don't we deserve a chance to explore what this could be?" "It's not that simple, York," Cleo said, her heart wrenching as she spoke the words, her mind a battlefield. She was torn between her emotions, doing the right thing, living the life she deserved. My mom expects me to take over the store, to give up everything I've worked so hard for. It's what she always wanted, and now that my dad's gone. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. She blames me for not being here, for not being the daughter she wanted. I can't just stay. The room filled with tension, and York's expression was closed off. He was upset with her. She couldn't blame him. Everyone seemed to be upset with her these days. "What do you want, Cleo?" "I'm scared." "Scared of what?" York asked. Cleo was scared of her feelings, scared of staying and giving in to her mother's expectations. If she gave in, would her life fall apart? She couldn't give up the life she'd worked so hard to build, not when her mother wouldn't see her as an equal and not when she'd lose herself in the process. Scared of the future. "I'm scared that I'll lose myself if I give in." York's face fell. "So that's it? You're just going to run back to the city, back to a life that's not fulfilling? What about us, Cleo? What about what we feel for each other?" Cleo's resolve faltered, her heart torn. "It's not about what I want. It's about what I have to do. I can't stay here, York. Not with everything that's happened. My dad was the only reason I came back, and now that he's gone—" "You have nothing to stay for," York said tightly. "That's not what I meant," Cleo said. He nodded and stepped back. "I'll leave you to it then," he said and turned. His words hung heavy in the air, a barrier she couldn't cross to reach him. The space between them grew into a vast chasm. "York!" Cleo called after him, but he didn't stop. He walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind him. Cleo listened to his steps, his car, the sound of the engine as he drove away. This was it. Her father was gone, and now York was, too. Her mother wouldn't accept her. The only way forward was to go back to Chicago, where she knew who she was and what she was supposed to do. Tears blurred her vision as she walked to her room and began to pack her bags. Each item of clothing she'd bought here was a reminder of the life she was leaving behind and a future she wasn't so sure she wanted anymore. When she zipped up her suitcase, a sense of finality settled over her. She was going back to the city, back to a life she'd once thought she wanted. But as she drove out of town, a part of her heart stayed in Maplewood Grove, with the father she'd lost and the love she was leaving behind. Chapter 14. York. York stood at the edge of his field, watching the cattle graze. The humidity in Maplewood Grove had been less the past little while, but the heat was still pressing for this time of year. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun began its descent, but the beauty of the evening was lost on him. He couldn't stop thinking about Cleo. Losing her had left a void in him that seemed to echo through his very existence. It had only been a few days since she left, but he felt her absence every day more than once. His life had become intertwined with hers, and the fact that she was gone made him feel as if a part of him was missing. He hadn't really felt this kind of pain since Helen left, and the resurgence of such an intense pain surprised him. It was unwelcome. He hated the idea of being alone again after he'd tasted the sweetness of what life with Cleo could be, and that irritated him. He'd been so happy to be alone before. He'd lived his life, done his chores, raised his son, and he'd been happy. Then he'd let his guard down with Cleo, allowing himself to feel, to hope. And now she was gone. He turned back to the house, his footsteps heavy with defeat. Braden leaned against the porch railing. "You're back," York said. "That was quick." Braden nodded. "It was just a delivery." "Right. Well, good thing you're here early so we can turn in for the night and get an early start tomorrow. We have to—" "Dad," Braden interrupted, his tone cautious. York looked at his son, a frown forming. "What's going on?" Braden asked. "What do you mean?" "Nothing is going on. I think you're forgetting I can tell when something is bothering you." Braden's expression was concerned. "I'm fine," York said. "Sure, Braden didn't believe him. "Why don't you tell me what's up?" York sighed and slumped forward, feeling the weight of his emotions. "I don't know, Bray." He stepped onto the porch and sat down in one of the rocking chairs that looked out over the ranch. "I thought I was fine on my own, but after Cleo, everything feels different." Braden pushed off the railing and took the seat next to his father. "You know, Dad, just because you can do it alone doesn't mean you should." York frowned at Braden. "You've spent years doing the right thing," Braden continued, "raising me, keeping the ranch afloat. Maybe it's time you thought about what you want and what makes you happy." York's gaze drifted to the horizon. Braden was right. He'd always put others first. The idea of chasing his own dreams and his own happiness was almost foreign. "Do you think I should go after her?" he asked. That was what he wanted, after all. But if she didn't want him, if she turned him down, she'd made it clear that her life wasn't here. "Yeah," Braden said firmly, "I do." York glanced at his son. "I saw how you were with her, Dad. You were happy for the first time since I can remember. And she was happy too, even if she's got her own stuff to figure out. You've always taught me to fight for what I believe in and for what I want in life. Maybe it's time you take your own advice." York chuckled. "Since when do you know so much about life?" "I had a good mentor," Braden said with a grin. It was true. York had been happy with Cleo, happier than he'd ever thought he could be. The thought of letting that go, not even trying to fight for it, didn't sit right with him. But what about her? That question pulled him up short every time. What if this wasn't what she wanted? It wouldn't matter what he wanted if she wasn't interested in being with him. He told himself that this was just a fling, that he couldn't get too attached because it would never last. He'd known he was looking for trouble, investing his heart. But York wasn't the kind of man who believed in casual dating, and Cleo was the kind of woman he could spend the rest of his life with. That was what he wanted. "I think I'm going for a ride," he announced. "What?" Braden asked. "Now." York nodded. "Yeah, I think I need to clear my head." "Just be careful out there. It will be dark soon." Braden clapped his father on the shoulder, a silent show of support. York watched his son head back into the house before he walked to the stables. He saddled his horse, the familiar motions providing a small measure of comfort. He needed space to think, to breathe. As he rode through the fields, the rhythm of the horse's hooves against the ground was soothing. He looked out over the open fields, bathed in the soft glow of twilight as he rode. This place had always been his haven, a place where he could find peace and clarity. But it had also been his pride and joy, the kind of place he was serious about fighting for. But what good was a place like this when he didn't have someone to share it with? It was his legacy he would leave behind for Braden, but until his son inherited the ranch, York didn't want to be alone. He wanted to share this place with someone else, to see the wonder in their eyes as they discovered all the beauty and charm that he knew was here. He thought back to the day when Cleo had ridden out with him the first time. That moment, her expression, the joy in her smile, had been a defining moment for him. It was the first time that he'd really believed he could have something real, something lasting. He directed his horse to the place where they'd had their picnic. He'd all but told her he loved her right then. The memories were sweet, hanging between the trees in the dusk, laced with pain. He dismounted and walked to the spot where he'd kissed her. He closed his eyes and thought back to her smile, the sound of her laughter, and the way she'd looked at him as if he were the only man in the world. Should he let her go? That question haunted him. She'd been so sure about leaving, so sure about walking away from what they had. Going after her would mean turning his back on the safety of his life before her, when he'd been alone but in control. What if he took that risk to be with her, and she left again? He'd had enough women leave him in his life to know that it wasn't a pain he wanted to live with again. After Helen, he hadn't thought he would ever bounce back. But if he let Cleo go, would he live a life of regret? What if he went after her and threw caution to the wind? A part of him wanted to try to see if they could share a life together. He opened his eyes and mounted his horse again. He had to get back to the house before it was completely dark. As the light of the sun dipped below the horizon, York felt a resolve settle in him. Braden was right. He'd spent so long doing what was needed, what was expected. It was time to do something for himself, to chase the flicker of happiness Cleo had ignited in him. If he got hurt, that would be a repeat of the past, and he was scared of that. But the alternative was to live a life that he knew now was empty, and that was even more terrifying. When he finally arrived at the house, walking under the starlit sky, his mind was clear. He was ready to face whatever came next. He was going to follow his heart. The next morning, York stopped his truck in front of Elaine's house. The smell of magnolias from her garden drifted to him, and a pang shot through York's chest. Thomas used to garden, and he'd planted those. He knocked on the door. Elaine opened the door, her face lined with grief. "York," she said, surprised to see him. "What brings you here?" "I just wanted to see how you were doing." "And to offer my condolences. I'm so sorry for your loss." Elaine nodded, and her eyes shimmered with tears. "Thank you. I'm doing as well as can be expected. It's not—" Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "It's not easy." "Do you want to come in? I put on some coffee a while ago." York nodded and stepped into the house. He waited in the living room while Elaine made coffee and brought it to him. "If there's anything you need, you let me know," York said. "Braden can help out too. You just say the word." "That's kind of you," Elaine said and sipped her coffee. "I've closed the shop for a while. I just need to find my feet and then I'll keep marching on." "It's good you're taking care of yourself," York said. "Doing everything alone is tough." York knew more about that than most, and his heart went out to Elaine. "Yeah, with Cleo gone again, there's no one else to help out, so I need to work it out for myself." "She left for the city," York said softly. Elaine's expression shifted, a flicker of something passing over her face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "Yes," she said. "She's gone back to her life. It's probably for the best." York frowned. There was more to her words, a deeper current beneath the surface. "If you don't mind me saying," he said carefully. It seemed she was torn about leaving. Elaine snorted and turned her gaze to a picture on the mantel, a younger Cleo, full of life and laughter. Cleo's always been stubborn, determined to make her own way. I guess that's what she has to do to be happy, but I wish she could find happiness closer to home. York didn't know what to say. She's so far away in the city, and it's so easy to get hurt, with no one there to look after her. Elaine chuckled expressionlessly. "Of course she'll fight me on that, telling me that she doesn't need someone to look after her, but that's Cleo. Headstrong and independent, just like Thomas was." Her eyes welled with tears. "I guess it will be years before I see her again." York studied Elaine. The pieces were falling into place. Elaine's tough exterior, her seeming indifference, had to be a mask for her fear of seeing her daughter hurt. She cared, probably more than she was willing to show. "Cleo is strong and she can make her own choices," York said. "She needs to know that she has a reason to stay and she can still be herself." Elaine pursed her lips. "She made it clear I have no space in her life a long time ago, York. I'm not going to fight the same battle again and again." York nodded, and they sat in silence for a while. He didn't know how their relationship could be fixed, only that there was a lot of fixing to do. "You care about her, don't you?" Elaine asked. When York looked up, Elaine had a glimmer in her eyes. He nodded. He wasn't going to hide it. "Yeah, I care about her a great deal. Maplewood Grove is her home, and I believe she belongs here with people who love her." There was a long silence in which Elaine seemed to be weighing her thoughts. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. "Maybe I've been too hard on her, too afraid to let her get hurt, and instead I pushed her away. She needs to make her own decisions, but God, I wish she would just come home. York squeezed her hand. It will be okay, Elaine, he said. Elaine nodded. He wasn't sure she believed him, but he believed that in the end it would always work out right. That was the only way he'd been able to work through pain before, and it was how he would face the challenges of his life now. He left the house after finishing his coffee and got in his truck. He was more determined now than ever to go after Cleo, not just for himself, but for her too. Cleo deserved to be where she was loved and cherished, and he would make sure that she knew Maplewood Grove, with all the memories and possibilities of a life filled with love, was where she belonged. Chapter 15. CEO. Cleo stared out of her office window, the bustling cityscape of Chicago all around her. The city was once full of possibilities, but now it was more like a distant echo. Physically, she was in Chicago, but her mind kept drifting to Maplewood Grove, to York. Cleo's heart had been torn since the day she left. She'd been so determined to go back to her life, to her business, and had thrown herself into work to forget about York and forget about her father's death. Now, 3 weeks later, she wondered if that had been the right choice. Her company was proof of her hard work, and it was doing well. The product recall had been managed successfully, and plans for a new line were underway. But Cleo wasn't as excited as she usually was, and she didn't feel the same pride of accomplishment she used to. She just felt hollow. When she turned back to her desk, Lydia walked in with the latest sales reports. Look at these numbers, Cleo. The recall barely made a dent, and with the new line, we're set to break records. She looked at Cleo eagerly. That's great, Cleo said, forcing a smile. Lydia's smile faded. What's wrong? Oh, nothing, Cleo said, waving her hand. Really, the numbers are good, and we should be excited. It's going to be a good quarter. Lydia narrowed her eyes. But? There are no buts, Cleo said. It's great news. When Lydia didn't say anything, Cleo sighed. It's just, I've had a lot on my mind lately. Lydia took a seat in one of the chairs facing Cleo, and her expression softened. Is this about your dad? I know you're still mourning. It's tough, and it will be for a while. Cleo nodded. It wasn't just losing her father that hurt. It was so much more. The truth was she was heartbroken, and not just over her dad. York's absence in her life had left a void no business success could fill. Lydia leaned forward, her demeanor shifting to that of a friend rather than an assistant. Cleo, talk to me. Is there more? You've been so different since you got back. Cleo sighed, her emotions getting heavier and heavier. I thought I could just come back here to my life and everything would go back to normal, but it hasn't. I miss Maplewood Grove, I guess, more than I ever thought I could. Lydia frowned. You've never liked it there. What's changed? Is there someone there? It's complicated, but yeah. There is someone, but it's about more than that. It's about finding where I belong, about knowing what makes me happy. I thought I had it all figured out, but it turns out I don't. Lydia reached for Cleo's hand and squeezed it. We have seasons in our lives, and what works for a while isn't always forever. I know, but I didn't think I'd have to have that kind of change this soon. My dad's gone, my business is booming, but I feel, I don't know, empty? Lydia asked. Cleo nodded. Yeah. Well, maybe that's exactly why you have to get out of here, Lydia said. Maybe you have to empty yourself out to see what it is you need. It can't hurt to try. Cleo looked at her. Lydia had been her assistant and a dear friend for years. Maybe she was right. Cleo was at a crossroads, torn between the life she'd built and the life she'd left behind. I'll figure it out, she said when Lydia stood again. Maybe it's just a bad patch. It's okay if it's not just a bad patch, Lydia said, but I know you'll figure it out. You're like a cat. You always land on your feet. Cleo smiled and Lydia left her office. Cleo turned her attention back to her screen, trying to focus on the numbers. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and it was hard to concentrate. Her company was successful, but at what cost? The hollow feeling in her chest was only getting worse, and the numbers and graphs in front of her seemed dull. The day finally drew to a close, and Cleo got ready to leave. When she got home, her thoughts were interrupted by a bouquet of wildflowers on her welcome mat, along with a letter. She bent down to pick it up, anticipation and fear mingling together as she tore the letter open. Dear Cleo, as I sit down to write this, I find myself at a loss for words, which, as you know, is a rare thing for me. I've always believed actions speak louder than words, but right now, in this moment, I need these words to bridge the miles between us, to carry what my heart is yearning to say. I've spent the last few days thinking about us, about what you mean to me, and about what I let slip away when you left Maplewood Grove. I've been a man of the land my whole life, Cleo, rooted in my ways and in my place in this world. But you brought something into my life that I didn't even know was missing, a sense of joy, of completeness that I hadn't felt in years. I know I may not have the right words or the grand gestures like you see in those city romance movies. What I have are these simple words, written from the heart. I love you, Cleo. There. I said it. I love you more than I ever thought possible. More than the sprawling fields and the open skies that have been my companions for so long. These past weeks without you have shown me a truth I can no longer ignore. I don't want to be alone anymore. Not when I know what it's like to be with you. You've opened my eyes to a new kind of happiness, one that I can't find in the solitude of my fields or the quiet of my home. I understand now that love isn't just about finding someone who shares your life. It's about finding that person who makes your life worth sharing. And for me, that person is you. You challenge me, you inspire me, and you make me want to be a better man, a man worthy of your love. So here's what I'm asking, Cleo. Meet me at the park tomorrow at noon. If you feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, meet me there. I'll be waiting, with a heart full of hope and a future that I want to build with you. But if you don't come, I'll understand. I'll cherish the time we had and the memories we made. I'll go back to my life in Maplewood Grove, but I'll carry a piece of you with me, always. Take your time. Think about what you want, what your heart truly desires. Know that whatever you decide, my love for you is unwavering, as steady and true as the land I've tended all these years. With all my love, York. As she read the letter, her emotions tumbled over each other. Love, fear, longing, uncertainty. York loved her. He said so in so many words. He loved her, and she couldn't deny that she loved him too. She'd never said it, but she did. And now he was here in Chicago waiting for her, ready to whisk her back to Maplewood Grove. Could she go? Could she give it all up for him and go back home? Her heart fluttered when she thought of him standing there, waiting for her. But it wasn't that simple. It wasn't ever that simple. The next morning, she threw herself into her work with more vigor than ever. She tried to find comfort in spreadsheets and plans, but her thoughts betrayed her. They kept drifting back to York. The letter he'd written, the love he'd declared. They were overwhelming. At 11, she walked into a board meeting with her investors. They wanted to see the projections for the next quarter. They wanted to know where the profit margins were. This was what Cleo did really well, and the meeting should have been a breeze. It wasn't. She was distracted, keeping her eye on the clock the whole time. She couldn't go to York. She couldn't give up everything she'd built here. She couldn't. Cleo? One of the investors asked, and she looked up. What? She hadn't heard a word he'd said. We're asking about the new line. What are you thinking for a date? Oh, she said, and glanced at the clock. It was 5 minutes until noon. We need to know what the next steps are. another investor said. "If we're going to do this—" He was there, waiting for her, and she was talking to investors about a new line of makeup. Makeup? What was she doing? York was waiting for her, and she was sitting here fussing over something that meant nothing in the long run, nothing to make her happy. "I have to go," she said, standing. "What?" the investors asked in unison. "I'm sorry, it's urgent." She ran out of the boardroom before they could respond. This was an important meeting, but there were more important things. York was waiting for her. She grabbed her bag and made a beeline for the elevator. "Where are you going?" Lydia asked, falling in step beside her. "I have to go." "Why?" "He's at the park waiting for me." "It's noon, Lydia. I've waited too long." Lydia grabbed her arm. "Wait. Just think about it. If you're going to walk away from everything you've worked so hard for, just be sure." Cleo paused, her heart racing. "I have to go. If I miss him, if he's gone, it's over." Lydia wanted to say something, but there was no time. Cleo hammered the button to the elevator, and when the doors slid open, she rode down to the lobby. She got into her car and raced toward the park. The clock on her console read 12:15. It was too late. What if he'd left? What if he was already gone? She drove faster, pushing her luck on the roads and praying she wouldn't get pulled over. She was desperate now, her heart aching with the possibility of losing him again. The cars in front of her slowed down to a crawl and then came to a dead stop. "No, no, no," Cleo muttered, craning her neck to see what was in front of her. She honked her horn, but it wasn't going to make a difference if she did. Something stopped the traffic from moving up ahead. She glanced at the time again. 12:20. This wasn't going anywhere. She had to do something, anything, to get to the park before it was too late. She put on her indicator and pulled to the side of the road before jumping out of the car. She left her hazards on and ran. If she got a ticket, then so be it. She could pay that later, but she couldn't lose York. Not now, not when she finally knew what she wanted. She ran toward the park, her heels clacking on the ground. Time ticked by and her breath rasped in and out of her lungs as she ran. When the park came into view and she finally made it onto the grass, she kicked off her heels so she could run faster. "York!" she called, her voice breathy. He was nowhere to be seen. She spun around, searching for him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and her breathing was ragged. Her legs screamed at her after running so fast and so far in heels that were not made for running, but she didn't care about it. All she cared about was York and seeing him again, telling him that she felt the same way he did. She needed him. Where was he? Was she too late? She looked at the time. It was 12:30. "York," she called again, but she didn't see him anywhere. Her time was up and he was gone. Chapter 16. York. He stood under the biggest tree in the middle of the park and looked for Cleo. It was noon on the dot, and he hoped to God that she'd decided to meet him. He'd left her a letter in which he'd poured out his heart. York had never been one to use words like that. He'd always been serious about showing someone, but it was one of those things where he had to tell her, or she would never understand. When he'd written that letter, he'd realized that it was the biggest thing he'd ever done, and that every word he'd written was true. He loved her more than he'd ever thought he could love anyone. He glanced at the time again. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt like an eternity. He knew that if she didn't show up by 12:30, she wasn't coming. He would wait until then, hoping beyond hope that this could be real, that he could find a happy ending. 12:10. Time was dragging on, and with every passing minute that she didn't show, his heart sank. He couldn't blame her for not coming. They were two completely different people. She was from the city and lived a completely different life than he did. She owned a business here in the city. He looked around at the buildings stretching tall and vast around him. This was nothing compared to his ranch, and that certainly wasn't what she was used to. Had he made a mistake thinking that she could be happy with him? Would she be able to live on a ranch with a rural life? She was meant for big city lights, the hum of busy streets, and the sound of people and traffic all around her. It was the life she'd chosen for herself all those years ago, and York worried that she would never give that up for him. 12:13. A couple with their little boy walked by, heading for the playground. The kid looked at him, waving and yelling, "Hi!" York waved back, watching the family. He thought about his son. Raising Braden to work alongside him and be a decent man had been fulfilling, but York wanted a family. He wanted a wife he could share his life with to fill his days and nights with love. He checked the time again. 12:18. The minutes passed so slowly, as if he were standing in quicksand. Every moment seemed to be slower than the last, and it felt as though the clock was moving backward instead of forward. How long was he going to wait? He'd given her a time and a place, and he was there. Was he a fool for thinking she would show? By 12:25, his heart sank to his shoes. He had to start accepting the truth. She wasn't going to come. He'd asked her, and he'd said in the letter that he wouldn't blame her if she didn't. He wanted her to choose, but now he hated that he'd said those words. He wanted her to come to him, to tell him she felt the same, to live the life he wanted for them together. Was it too much to ask? Too much to dream? York started walking toward the main road. There were some benches along the way, and he could sit there while he waited for the bus. He'd told her, and now he had to live with the consequences. He'd taken a chance, a leap of faith. If he hadn't done that, he would have forever asked himself, what if? And he would never have known. At least now he knew. He sat down, resting his elbows on his knees, his head bowed. The city rumbled and hummed around him. Traffic was picking up, getting thicker, and somewhere sirens wailed. It echoed in his soul, the lamenting cry of a broken heart. He could figure it out, couldn't he? He'd dealt with loss once before, and he'd managed to bounce back. It would take time, but maybe he could carry on and forget about Cleo eventually. His heart was shattered. It had taken a risk, and it had lost. It wasn't something he'd ever done before, and he didn't know how he was supposed to heal from that. He wasn't sure that he ever could. Maybe the only way was to start small. He'd get up in the morning and do the chores, and then go and check the cows and then the calves. He'd go and check the machinery and then the fences, and then go and clean the stables. One day would roll into the next and the next. He'd lose himself in his work and his son, and slowly, eventually, he would start to forget. His life would go on. He would keep busy and not think about her, and he would manage somehow. The bus arrived, rumbling to a stop in front of him, and the doors opened with a hiss. York stood and headed toward the bus. The sound of someone calling his name made him stop. It was faint, and he wasn't sure he'd heard it. He looked over his shoulder and saw nothing. "York!" he heard again, this time a lot clearer. He turned and looked across the grass. There she was, standing barefoot in the middle of the park, her dark hair tousled and messy, breathing hard. She spun around frantically, looking for him. "Cleo!" he called out and headed toward her. He broke into a run and closed the distance between them with ease. She spun around to face him, and when she did, her face lit up. She ran, meeting him halfway, and jumped into his arms, wrapping her arms around his neck. He buried his face against her shoulder, holding her tight. "I can't live without you," she said. York let out a laugh. "I thought you weren't going to come." "The traffic," she said in a hoarse voice, and he set her down. He looked into her warm hazel eyes. "I got stuck in a meeting and then on the road. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a ticket." He hooked her wild hair behind her ear before he cupped her cheek. "I've got it." "You came all this way," she said. "For me." "I told you I love you," he said. "I love you too, York," she said, and the words warmed his heart. It was as if his entire world had changed and everything was brighter. York pulled her in and pressed his lips against hers. He kissed her with all the love he had for her and all the hope he had for the future. He'd made the leap and taken the chance, and now it was time for him to live with the consequences. But the consequences were more than anything he'd ever hoped for. "I don't know how to do this," Cleo whispered when they finally broke the kiss. "I don't know how to leave this life behind and go back." "I'll help," York said. "We can work it out, make your business remote or online. Maybe open a shop in town. We'll do whatever it takes. As long as we have each other." She smiled. "Yes, as long as we have each other. Let's go." He took her hand and led her toward the street. She led him to where her car was parked against the curb. Thankfully, she hadn't gotten a ticket. York held her hand the whole way. They talked and laughed, and every now and then he couldn't believe she was here with him. He couldn't believe that she'd chosen him. Cleo drove them back to her apartment. York had booked a hotel room, but he'd meant to go home that night if Cleo turned him down. He hadn't made further plans than that. Tonight he would sleep in her guest bedroom, and tomorrow they could go home. Chapter 17. Cleo. "How are we doing?" Nancy Cooper asked when Cleo sat down for breakfast in the large dining area at the bed and breakfast where she'd stayed the last 2 days. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," Cleo said with a smile. She hadn't known this bed and breakfast existed. She might have considered staying there before, but her father had needed her at the time, and it had been good to be home with him before he'd passed away. Cleo felt a pang when she thought about him. She missed her father so much and wished she'd done things differently. It hurt even more now that she was back in Maplewood Grove. There wasn't much in Chicago that reminded her of her dad, so she could push those thoughts of him away. But here, his ghost seemed to be everywhere she looked. After finishing breakfast, Cleo got into the truck she'd rented and drove out to York's ranch. The Audi A6 she'd used before wasn't the right car for the small town, and it wouldn't work for the life she wanted to create here now. "Morning, Cleo," Braden said, waving from the barn when she pulled up. "He's in the back field. You might want to take a horse." "Thanks," Cleo said with a smile, and headed toward the stable, where the mare she'd ridden before was waiting for her. A ranch hand saddled the horse for her. "Hey, girl," Cleo said, and rubbed the horse's velvety nose before she mounted and headed out across the fields. It had only been a couple of days since she'd been back, but she already felt so at home here. Braden had welcomed her with open arms when York had brought her to officially tell his son that they were together. It seemed that the whole town knew already, but Braden had congratulated them. York was where Braden had said he would be, and when Cleo rode up, he straightened from where he was mending a fence and grinned up at her. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" he said, his gaze warm. Cleo slid off the horse and York kissed her on the lips, a chaste kiss, but warmth washed over her body all the same. "Everything okay?" Cleo nodded. "More than okay. I talked to Lydia, and it looks like we can manage the business like this with me being remote for a while. I'm flying to Chicago in a couple of weeks to meet with an online seller who might be able to help with distribution so I can handle things differently moving forward." "That's great news," York said, impressed. "I knew you would figure something out." "I actually like the idea of not being in the office all the time," Cleo admitted. "I loved it before, but out here everything is so different. I realized that this might be what I want instead." "Well, you're more than welcome to spend as much time here as you like," York said. "Have you spoken to your mom yet?" Cleo's smile faded and nerves twisted her stomach into a knot. "No, I haven't." "I'm nervous about it." "It's going to be okay, you know," York said. "I know that you've been through a lot, but she'll always be your mother, and now with Thomas gone—" He swallowed hard. Cleo knew he mourned Thomas's death as much as she did. He'd had such a good relationship with Thomas while she'd been gone. "It's just the two of you, and you need each other." "I don't know if she'll ever need me," Cleo scoffed, aware of how bitter she sounded. But it was a tough thing to do, and she didn't know if she could ever reconcile with her mother. "Better to get it over and done with, and then you'll know where you stand with her," York offered. He was right, of course. Cleo had come back to Maplewood Grove for York despite the reasons she'd left in the first place. She wasn't sure she could make things right with her mom, but York was right. It was just the two of them, now that her father was gone. She had to at least try. Someone had to be the bigger person. "How about a cup of coffee first?" York suggested. "To ease your nerves, and I'd like to spend a bit of time with you." Cleo smiled and agreed. Since she'd arrived in Maplewood Grove, she and York had spent every possible minute together. She couldn't believe how well they fit together, and she'd never felt like this before. With York, she had butterflies in her stomach all the time, and just the thought of seeing him made her giddy. She was happy, and when she was with him, it was easy to forget about everything else. York got onto his horse. Together they rode back to the ranch house, where Braden met them for a cup of coffee too. After seeing York, Cleo got back in her truck and headed to her mother's house in town. When she arrived, the garden looked unkempt and the curtains were drawn. Cleo frowned. Something didn't seem right. She walked to the front door and knocked, waiting for an answer. It took a long time before Elaine finally opened the door. "Cleo," she said, her face expressionless. "I heard you were back in town." "Hi, Mom," Cleo said softly. They stood in silence staring at each other until Elaine finally buckled. "Come in." Cleo stepped into the house that was once her childhood home. Now the home was dark and somber, and grief curled in the corners. Guilt washed over Cleo. She should have been here for her mom after her dad's death. It just hadn't felt like Elaine wanted her there. She'd kept her out of the loop with his health for so long. They sat down in the living room, and the silence stretched thin between them. "So you're back," Elaine finally said. Cleo nodded. "I am. I'm sorry I wasn't here for you when Dad died. You didn't tell me he was sick, though." "He was sick, wasn't he?" "Of course he was sick," Elaine said, her tone sharp. "He had dementia, Cleo. You know that." "I didn't know how bad it was. You didn't tell me anything. If I'd known, I would have been here for you both a lot more." "You didn't want to be here." Cleo shook her head. "Let's not do this again, Mom. You know I would always be here for him. And I'm here for you now, too." "And then what? You'll just leave again?" "No," Cleo said and sighed. "I'm moving back. For good." Elaine's eyes widened. "So you're serious then?" Cleo nodded. She knew her mom didn't believe her. She had never liked her living in Chicago. She'd never approved of her going away. But now that her father was gone, and Elaine had hopefully made peace with the fact that she wouldn't take over the store, everything was different. "I'm back, Mom. And I want us to try to get along." Elaine shook her head. "I don't understand. That I want to fix things with you." "Why now? I've already lost one parent, Mom. I don't want to lose you, too." Elaine stared at Cleo, and then tears welled in her eyes. "You left, Cleo." "I wanted to live my own life, not what you planned for me." "Do you have any idea how big and scary the world is?" "I know, Mom," Cleo said, confused about the direction her mom was taking. "But it doesn't have to be all bad. You were so far away, how was I supposed to look after you?" Cleo frowned. "Is that why you didn't want me to leave?" Elaine didn't answer her. She tried to wrangle her emotions and only barely succeeded. "I thought you didn't want me to do my own thing," Cleo said softly. "You always said makeup was a waste of time, nothing sensible about it. But I made it big." "And I was so proud," Elaine whispered. "So was your father. But by then, we were barely talking. And then, when you came back—" "You lied to me about his health," Cleo said. "You didn't want me to be a part of his life anymore." "I thought that was what you wanted," Elaine cried out. "I thought you were the one who didn't want it anymore." Cleo shook her head. Had it been a misunderstanding with her mom all this time? "I've never been good with putting my emotions into words," Elaine said. "I've never been comfortable saying things out loud, and I don't like showing what I feel. But I love you, Cleo. I've always loved you." "I love you too, Mom," Cleo said, and she stood crossing the living room to hug her mother. Elaine stiffened when Cleo wrapped her arms around her, but then she relaxed and closed her arms around Cleo too. They sat together, entwined, and years of anger and pain melted away. It would take a while for them to become friends again, but this was a start, and it meant everything to Cleo to know that her mother had cared all along. Finally, they broke the hug and sat in silence together. "I want to help," Cleo said. "I won't take over the store or work there. I have my own business to run. But I want to hire someone to help you out so you don't have to do it all alone. I'll pay for it, and you can train them just how you want them to do it." "Why?" Elaine asked. "Because you've worked hard your whole life, Mom. You deserve to take a break, to breathe." Elaine's eyes welled with tears again. "I can do it, you know." "I know," Cleo said, "but you deserve to rest." "Maybe I could go on a vacation." "You can do whatever you want, Mom. You can go to Hawaii, you can stay home and do nothing." "Maybe I could see more of the world," Elaine said thoughtfully. "Whatever you want to do, it's time you start doing it," Cleo said. She felt so much better now that they'd straightened things out between them. Maybe her mom had been hard on her when she was younger because she didn't want her to get hurt, and maybe Cleo had misjudged her mom for trying to be a mother. But they were together now, and Cleo felt a sense of peace settle inside her. "Tell me about York," Elaine said. A blush rose to Cleo's cheeks. "He's a really great guy, Mom. He makes me feel alive." "I can see that," Elaine said. "He cares about you." "How do you know?" "He told me." Cleo blinked at Elaine. "He did. He's a good man. He spent a lot of time here with his little boy when his wife left him, and I've always wanted him to find the right woman. I've wanted you to find the right man too, you know. I think the two of you are perfect together." "You have no idea how wonderful it is to hear you say that." "Your father would have approved too," Elaine said, and her eyes shimmered with unshed tears again. Cleo took her mother's hand and squeezed it. "I miss him," she said softly. "Me too," Elaine answered. They sat together, sharing their grief. It was so much easier to carry the load when they didn't have to do it alone, and Cleo was glad that they'd made amends. She was glad to be back. "So, are you going to stay at the bed and breakfast, or are you coming home?" Elaine asked. Cleo smiled. "I'm coming home." Chapter 18. York. Over the next few months, York and Braden prepared for the coming winter, making sure that everything was ready. Christmas was creeping closer, and this time York looked forward to it more than usual. He always loved Christmas, but this year they were spending it on the ranch, with Elaine and Cleo joining them. York hauled a large tree through the door, messing twigs everywhere. "Oh, wow," Braden said, coming from the bedroom. "That's a big tree." "It's going to be a big Christmas." Braden helped York set it up in the ranch house living room, in the corner next to the fireplace. "We haven't had a tree up for a while now," Braden said. "Yeah, I thought it would be good to go back to our roots and do things the way we used to. It's time to start living again." "I'm glad." Braden patted him on the back. "Everything has changed since Cleo came back." York nodded. Braden was right. His life was so different now. He was ready to live it. "I want to talk to you about something," Braden said. York looked at his son with a frown. "Something serious?" "In a way," Braden said. York pointed to the couch so Braden would take a seat, and he sat down in his usual armchair. "I was hoping we could shuffle things around on the ranch a bit." "How do you mean?" York asked. Braden leaned his elbows on his knees, fingers intertwined between them. "Well, I want to take more responsibility around here. I was hoping I could lay claim to half the calves that are born next spring so that I can start a life of my own and have something to show for the hard work I'm doing here." "You have everything to show for it," York said with a frown. "This ranch is here for you to inherit when I'm gone." "I know, but hopefully that won't be for a long time still." "I want to have something to show for it now. Of course, I won't leave or anything, I just—" "No, I understand." York said, thinking about it. His father had left him the ranch, and York meant to do the same, but Braden had a point. The ranch hadn't belonged to York until his own father had passed. Until then, he'd had nothing to show for his work, nothing to his name. It wasn't right to do it that way. "All right, you can have half," York said, making up his mind. "Thanks, Dad. I promise I'll only take half the calves and nothing, half of everything," York said. Braden blinked at him. "What?" "You work just as hard as I do, and you deserve to have as much as I do around here. Half the ranch and everything on it is yours. Half the income, too. Not just a family. We'll build you a house in the east corner, and you can set up there with your wife and kids, too, when you have them. And then when I pass, the rest of it goes to you, too." "After Cleo, of course," Braden said with a grin. York scratched his head. "I know you're going to end up marrying her." York felt warmth rise to his cheeks, but his son wasn't wrong. He had every intention of marrying Cleo as soon as the time was right. "Do you mean it?" Braden asked. "Half of everything?" "Of course. You're the reason I still have a ranch. This place wouldn't run without you, and I owe you a lot." Braden stood and pulled York to his feet. "Don't get all mushy on me." "I'm not." They hugged, patting each other on the back. "And don't think that means you can slack off," York said. "You still need to pull your weight." Braden laughed. "I'm not planning on slacking off." "You can't get rid of me that easily." York smiled. It was good to have the ranch in capable hands. He was proud of his son. "Are you going to tell her today?" Braden added. "Yeah, I think so," York said. Braden smiled and headed out the door. York stayed behind, tangled up in his own feelings. Things were changing for the better. It was hard to imagine that life had been so bland. He'd been happy then, but now that he had Cleo and Braden was growing up and becoming his own man, York realized just how colorful and beautiful everything could be. He glanced at the time and left the house. He'd arranged to meet Cleo in town, and he didn't want to be late. When he stopped in front of the bookstore, Lila waved to him from inside. He waved back, and a moment later, Cleo arrived. "What are we doing here?" Cleo asked after they kissed hello. "A bookstore date?" No, York said. "But I guess we could do that later, if you want." "What I want to show you is on top." Cleo looked up at the top floor. The windows were dark, and the building almost faded away in contrast to the other vibrant storefronts in town. "What's on top?" "Come," York said. He led Cleo to the side of the building where stairs led to a door. York climbed the stairs first and unlocked the door with a set of keys that had hung in his cabinet at home for decades. "What is this place?" Cleo asked. "It's office space I inherited from my dad," York said. "He bought this place and meant to make something of it, but he never got around to it. The ranch kept him too busy. When he passed away, I didn't know what to do with it, so it just sat here." "And you didn't want to sell?" York shook his head. "I didn't need the money, and I always thought something like this could come in handy one day." Cleo nodded and took a few steps into the space, looking around. York knew the place needed some TLC, a bit of paint, some fixing, and the windows desperately needed a washing. But it was a great office space. Set on the main road that led through town, the location was excellent, and the view was nice. "What are you going to do with it now?" "I'm going to give it to you." Cleo spun around and blinked at York. "What?" "You need office space here in town to expand your business." "I know it's getting harder, running your business out of your room at your mom's house." Cleo had been working hard to make her business remote. The offices were still in Chicago, but over the past few months, she had done really well to move her products onto the internet, and her orders had all but doubled since she did it. She ran it all from her room, cramped and small, but she didn't want to move out of the house until at least the new year. She didn't want to leave Elaine alone. York could understand that. "Oh, York," Cleo said. "I can't believe this." "I can," York said with a grin and took Cleo into his arms. "You work hard and you're making a success of it. You deserve it, and you can put this to good use." She kissed him before she cupped his cheeks and looked into his eyes. "Thank you." "Of course," he said. "Anything for you." She blushed, and he loved the way her cheeks pinkened. They'd only been together for a couple of months now, but it felt like it had already been a lifetime, and he was excited about what the future held for them both. "We have dinner reservations tonight," York said. Cleo cocked her head. "Where?" "I thought you said you had a lot of work to do today." "I do," he said. "And then I'm picking you up, and we're going to the diner." Cleo nodded. The diner wasn't very fancy, but it had become their favorite place to go. It had been Thomas's favorite place, and Cleo liked going there when she wanted to feel closer to her dad. York knew that Thomas would have approved of them being together, and he wished that his old friend was still around so that he could show it to him. The only way to honor his friend and the man who had been like a father to him in his time of need was to look after his daughter. And York fully planned to do that to make sure that no matter what, Cleo had everything she needed and was happy. And you should tell your mom, too. "I'm sure Elaine would love it if you show up with the news," York added. Cleo chuckled and shook her head. "Are you sure she will?" "I am," he said, nodding. Cleo's relationship with her mom had become much better over the past few months that she'd been back in town. After they'd straightened things out, they still got stuck now and then, but York was convinced it was because they were more alike than they realized, and that was why they butted heads. The most important thing was that they were okay again, and they both knew how much they cared for one another. Cleo had proved that by staying at home and being there for Elaine, not running again when the going got tough, and Elaine had stopped putting pressure on Cleo, instead showing an interest in the business and proving that she supported her daughter. "I'll see you tonight," York said and kissed Cleo one more time. "And in the new year, your business can grow when you're in this office." "It's incredible," Cleo said. "Thank you." "I love you." "I love you, too." Cleo grinned at him, her dark eyes sparkling. Chapter 19. York. The ranch house at York's place, nestled in the heart of Maplewood Grove, was a picture of festive warmth and cheer. Snow had fallen for a change. It hadn't been a white winter until the last few days before Christmas, but now snow blanketed the surrounding fields, casting a serene white glow under the winter sun. The old, sturdy structure, usually modest and unassuming, was now adorned with twinkling lights that outlined its classic silhouette against the winter sky. Wreaths of fresh evergreen, dotted with bright red berries and festive bows, hung on the doors and windows, welcoming all with traditional holiday charm. When Cleo and her mother arrived, their breath made clouds in the crisp air. York invited them with hugs and a hearty Merry Christmas. They were greeted by the scent of freshly baked cookies and a fire that crackled merrily in the hearth. Cleo felt like she was at home in Maplewood Grove, as if she had never left even though she hadn't been there in years. Memories of Christmases in the small town with her family rushed over her like the tide. The warmth from the hearth and the love shared between the people there reminded her of her childhood, and she was overwhelmed with the sudden, intense feeling that she was right where she belonged, with her family and with York. A pang of sorrow washed over her. She missed her father so much. This was the first Christmas without him, and she wished he were there, to see her reunited with her mother and her boyfriend, and to see her finally finding her way back home to the place where her heart belonged. Inside, the ranch house was transformed into a Christmas wonderland. The air was filled with the comforting scents of cinnamon and pine, mingling with the sweet aroma of baking to create a cozy, inviting atmosphere. The centerpiece of the living room was a majestic Christmas tree, standing tall near the hearth. Its branches were lovingly decorated with a collection of ornaments, some old and handed down through generations, others new and sparkling. The tree was wrapped in strands of shimmering lights, casting a warm, soft glow that danced across the walls. Beneath the tree, a collection of thoughtfully wrapped gifts added to the sense of anticipation and joy. "This looks incredible," Cleo breathed when she stood next to York, taking in the sight. "You look incredible," York murmured back, giving her a sideways hug and a kiss on the top of her head. "Thank you," she said, smiling and blushing slightly. "It's true," he insisted. "You really do look stunning." Cleo had chosen her outfit for the day carefully, making an effort for Christmas. Gone were the days when she wore dress suits and high heels, but today she'd put on a red dress and kitten heels. Her dark, silky hair fell over her shoulders. York looked great in a green shirt and the proverbial ugly Christmas sweater. His hair was combed neatly and his graying beard was trimmed. "Mom looks happy to be here, too," Cleo said, glancing through the archway that led from the dining room to the large kitchen. In the kitchen, Elaine was in her element orchestrating the Christmas feast with a skillful blend of love and culinary expertise. She'd asked if she could take care of Christmas lunch, and she was making magic. It had been years since Cleo had seen Elaine this swept up. It had been a long time since they'd spent Christmas together at all, and Cleo had nearly forgotten how much her mother enjoyed putting together a holiday feast. The kitchen was alive with the sounds of sizzling, chopping, and occasional laughter as Elaine put together a spread that was nothing short of a holiday masterpiece. "Can I help?" Cleo asked Elaine when they walked into the kitchen. No, Elaine said. "Get something to drink." "I'm almost done." She shooed them out of the kitchen, and York laughed, pouring them each a cup of hot chocolate. Braden came in from outside where he'd checked on the ranch, making sure everything was okay. "You're working on Christmas Day?" Cleo asked him when he hugged her and wished her a Merry Christmas. "The ranch never sleeps, not even on Christmas," he said. "You look great." "Thanks," Cleo said, and York poured Braden a cup of hot chocolate too. They walked into the dining room. The dining table was set with a beautiful red and green plaid tablecloth, complementing the rustic charm of the ranch house. At the center stood a large, handcrafted candle holder, its candles flickering gently, casting a soft light over the array of dishes. It wasn't long before Elaine brought out the food, plate and dish after plate and dish. The spread was a delightful mix of traditional and modern. A golden brown roasted turkey sat proudly at the center, surrounded by dishes of creamy mashed potatoes, rich gravy, and a colorful medley of roasted vegetables. Side dishes included a tangy cranberry sauce, fluffy stuffing infused with herbs and spices, and a fresh, crisp salad. For dessert, there was a choice between a classic pumpkin pie and a decadent chocolate Yule log, both promising a sweet end to the festive meal. "You've outdone yourself, Elaine," Braden exclaimed. "Yes," Cleo agreed. "It all looks delicious." "Well," Elaine said, sitting down, "I wanted to give you a Christmas feast, and I hope I succeeded." "You did," York said, grinning. "We're going to eat like kings." He served them, filling their plates with food and passing the dishes around. The room was filled with laughter and conversation, stories of past Christmases mingled with hopes for the future. "I think it's time we open gifts," Cleo suggested. When she lived at home as a child, gifts were always opened first thing on Christmas Day, but they'd all agreed to do it together at the ranch after lunch. It was more festive that way, celebrating their togetherness. "All right," Elaine said. York nodded and took his seat again. "That sounds like a great idea." They moved to the living room, sitting down on the comfortable couches, and York played Santa, handing out the gifts that had been put under the Christmas tree. The first was a small box that was wrapped neatly and tied with a bow. "This is for you, Mom," she said when York handed it to Elaine. Elaine smiled and carefully unwrapped the present. When the paper fell away, she gasped. "It's beautiful," she said, holding up a small gold locket. Cleo had chosen a gold locket that was shaped like a heart. The engraving on the front read "Family," and the picture inside was of the three of them, and on the other side, one of Elaine and Thomas. "Thank you, sweetheart," Elaine said, standing and pulling her daughter into a tight hug. Her eyes welled with tears, and they held on to each other, both wrapped up in Thomas's memory. When they finally let go, they were both emotional. "This is for Braden," York said. "From both of us." He glanced at Cleo before he gave the box to his son. Braden unwrapped the box, and his eyes widened. He took out a key and frowned. "Is this?" "Yeah," York said. "You deserve something flashier than the old truck you're driving around." Braden looked shocked. "You got me a car." His voice was filled with excitement, and his eyes gleamed. "We did," York laughed. "Thank you so much." He jumped up and hugged his dad before he hugged Cleo. "This is incredible." "You're welcome," Cleo said. "It's the least I could do. You're always helping out on the ranch and driving around. You need a car." York handed out more presents. A new sewing machine from York to Elaine, whose machine had broken earlier in the year, and there hadn't been money or time to replace it with how ill Thomas was. And to York from Cleo, a brand new watch. On it, she had engraved to all the time in the world together. York kissed her. "Always," he whispered, and then he gave her a gift, too. A necklace and a note. "The first foal next season is yours," York said. "We'll help you train it." "You gave me a horse," Cleo said, surprised. "I did," York said with a grin. "I want you to be a part of the ranch life, and there's nothing like having a horse you trained yourself." Cleo laughed and hugged York. It was such a sweet gesture. Braden gave her a coupon for a massage from the spa, and she smiled. "I'm sure I'll need it after the holiday rush." She laughed. Braden gave his father a coupon for a beer at the local tavern, and York laughed. "We can drink it when Cleo joins us for New Year's." They all laughed and sat back, drinking in the warmth of the Christmas cheer and the togetherness of family. "I have one more gift for you," York said to Cleo. She frowned. All the gifts under the tree had been unwrapped, the wrapping paper in a pile in the corner. "What do you mean?" she asked. York stood in front of her, and then he sank down to one knee. Cleo clasped her hands to her mouth, and York took out a small velvet box from his pocket. "I thought I was happy going through the motions," York started. "But you know what they say. You don't miss what you don't know. Well, that changed when I got to know you, and you changed my life forever. I love you, Cleo, more than I can put into words. I want to spend the rest of our lives together, building your business, running the ranch, and being a family. Will you marry me?" Cleo was breathless and her heart thundered in her chest. She knew her answer right away, and she didn't have to think twice about it. She'd known she wanted to be with York very soon after getting to know him, and for a while it had seemed she couldn't. She hadn't allowed herself the chance to be completely happy. Now that she was back in Maplewood Grove, she knew she was where she belonged, and she couldn't imagine anything better than being at York's side as his wife. "Yes, I'll marry you." York opened the box, revealing a gorgeous diamond engagement ring, and Cleo's eyes widened. He slipped it onto her finger, and then he stood to kiss her. The kiss was long and passionate, and when he broke the kiss, she felt breathless. "This is the best Christmas ever," Cleo sighed. "You know what they say," York said. "If you can't celebrate Christmas with the ones you love, then what is the point?" "It's true," Elaine said. "And the people we love are all right here," Cleo agreed. "Together, always," Braden said. "Always," York repeated. They hugged each other, and the sounds of laughter filled the house. Outside, the snow fell in heavy flakes, dusting the ground with a blanket of white. Inside, the fire burned brightly, and the air was filled with the sweet scents of cinnamon and pine, alongside the warmth of family and love. Epilogue. CLEO. The sun was setting over Maplewood Grove, casting a golden hue over York's ranch as Cleo walked alongside him, her hand comfortably nestled in his. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers, a perfect backdrop for their evening stroll. Cleo glanced up at York, her heart skipping a beat as she took in the sight of him, his strong jaw and piercing blue eyes. The way his graying blonde hair fell across his forehead, slightly tousled by the breeze. He looked so handsome, so at ease, and the feeling of his hand in hers was enough to send butterflies fluttering in her stomach. They had been engaged for a few weeks now, and it still felt like a dream. Cleo had never imagined that she would find someone who could make her feel this way, and yet here she was, walking hand in hand with the man of her dreams. York's eyes met hers, a smile tugging at his lips as he leaned down to brush a kiss across her cheek. "You know, every time I look at this," Cleo said, glancing at the sparkling engagement ring on her finger, "I can't help but feel like the luckiest woman in the world." York smiled, his eyes reflecting the same warmth as the setting sun. "I'm the lucky one, Cleo. To think I almost let you slip away. I can't wait to call you my wife." Cleo's heart swelled with love and joy, and she pressed a soft kiss to York's lips, savoring the feeling of being in his arms. "Me neither, York. Me neither." The last rays of the sun cast a golden glow over the happy couple, and the sound of the creek bubbling gently in the background filled Cleo's heart with peace. She knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and nothing could stop them from finding happiness in each other. "I love you, Cleo," York said softly, his eyes filled with adoration. "I love you too, York," Cleo replied, a smile lighting up her face. "I was thinking," York said, "we should have the wedding here." "Really?" "The reception, at least." "Why not? We can do it in the barn, make it pretty, and maybe get married in the chapel in town." "I love that idea," Cleo said, excitement growing within her. "We could decorate the barn with flowers and string lights everywhere. It would be beautiful." "It will be, love," York said, pulling her close. "We'll make it beautiful. We'll make it perfect." "Just like you," Cleo said, grinning up at him. York laughed and shook his head. "Just like you, Cleo. Just like you." The last vestiges of the sunset were disappearing, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky as they turned and headed back to the house. Soon this would be Cleo's home too, and she couldn't wait. She walked into the kitchen and started making dinner, while York closed up the barn and checked on the horses for the night. While she cooked, she hummed to herself. Braden entered the kitchen, his face beaming with pride and accomplishment. Cleo looked up and smiled at the sight of her soon-to-be stepson looking so pleased. "What's got you looking so happy?" she asked, setting aside the bowl of mashed potatoes she was working on. "I just sold 5 of the bulls," he said, "in one auction, and I got a pretty good deal." "Dad's going to be pleased as punch." "That's a big one," Cleo said. She was only starting to learn about cattle and auctions, but Braden was on top of it, and he knew exactly what he was doing. "I couldn't have done it without your help," Braden said. "And Dad's, of course, but you've been such a huge support. I can't imagine how he survived without you." "We'll get through it all together," Cleo said, smiling at Braden. She was so proud of him, and she could see how much he meant to York. The two had built their lives around the ranch, and the fact that they were finally coming together as a family was a dream come true. York entered the kitchen and looked between his son and his fiancée, his heart swelling with pride and love. "What are you two conspiring about?" he asked, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just discussing business," Braden said, laughing. "Oh, really?" York raised an eyebrow. "Anything you care to share with the class?" "Guess who just brought in the biggest haul from the cattle auction?" Braden announced, holding up a sizable check. "That's fantastic, Braden," York exclaimed. "It looks like you're running the ranch as if it were your own now." Braden nodded, his pride evident. "I've learned from the best." "Dad, you've been an amazing teacher. I just hope I can keep up the good work." He grinned at York, who looked as proud as Cleo knew he'd be. Cleo's smile widened. "I have no doubt about that. You've been doing a wonderful job." "Business seems to be going just great all around," York said and looked at Cleo, who blushed. She'd spent the day in her new office, reviewing the latest reports from her business. Despite her initial fears, her decision to step back and manage it remotely had proven successful. Her staff was handling the day-to-day operations without a hitch, and her presence was no longer required in the office. "The company is doing well, yes," Cleo said, trying not to show how overwhelmed she was by the positive feedback. "That's incredible, Cleo," Braden said. "Yeah, it really is," York agreed. "I'm so proud of you." Cleo's blush deepened. "Thank you, guys," she said. "I never thought I'd say this, but it feels good to have the extra time off to focus on our relationship." York wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close, planting a kiss on her cheek. "I'm glad you feel that way," he said. "Actually, it's doing better than ever," Cleo said, not even trying to seem nonchalant anymore. She was so excited about the way her business was turning out. "We're expanding our line, and the team in Chicago is doing an amazing job. I'm so proud of you, Cleo. You've managed to keep your dream alive even from here," York said, admiration clear in his voice. Their shared success in their respective endeavors only strengthened their bond, a beautiful blend of love and mutual respect. "Yes," Cleo agreed, her voice soft. "Things seem to be looking up for all of us." As she finished dinner, the three of them settled down at the table. There was a new energy in the room, a sense of anticipation and excitement about the future. Cleo had never been happier, and she could tell that York and Braden were equally excited about what the future held for them. Soon she would be married to York, and she would move in here, and they would keep building their lives together. She'd had a rocky past, but now there was nothing ahead but a bright future, and it was all thanks to the York. He didn't know it, but he was her knight in shining armor, and she was the happiest and luckiest woman in the world. Ready to continue this series with Book 2? Grab Bookends of the Heart and read about Lila and James. You've been listening to Memories on Main Street, Book 1 in the Hearts of Maplewood Grove series by Wendy Meadows. To learn more about Wendy's books, visit her site at wendymeadows.com.